Just had a few housekeeping items to resolve. Would like to excuse council member Dalpaz tonight.
Her microphone?
Microphone's
It's coming.
They're coming.
No.
It just takes a little bit to.
Okay, there we go. Welcome to City Council meeting.
What?
There are free hearing aids down over the senior center for those who need them. Anyway, welcome this evening to our City Council meeting on January 11th of 2022. We appreciate your participation this evening. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for wearing a mask this evening. Even though we don't have a mandate in the city, I think it's good that we try to limit as much as we can the spread. So thank you for those who are here tonight making that choice. We'll start our meeting tonight. We'll have a thought or prayer and pledge of allegiance by Council Member Barker. So Council Member Barker.
Start off with an invocation. Our dear Heavenly Father, we're grateful for the opportunity we have to meet tonight as a city council. We're grateful for the citizens that have showed up and for the involvement that they have in our meetings. We're grateful for the opportunity to listen and hear from them. Please bless us tonight that we'll be led by the Spirit and that we'll be able to make the best decisions for North Ogden and that we can do what's best for us all. These things we say in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Council Member Barker. Tonight we have a presentation. It's called Approved Voting Presentation. I'm anxious to hear that. I don't know a lot about it. We have with us tonight Nate Allen and Ammon Gruwell with Utah Approves. We also have Ricky Hatch, who's our Weber County clerk. So we auditor. Don't want to leave that out. That's important. So we appreciate you spending some time with us tonight. So we'll proceed.
Yeah, thanks for having us today. We do have a presentation, so we'll just wait for that to get in a second. Okay, as Phil said, my name is Nate Allen. This is Emily Gruwell. We are with Utah Approves. We established this organization about a year ago just to try to reform our election process with well-researched and common sense policy. And the policy that we're supporting today is called approval voting. So we're presenting this to the council for consideration. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So you may be wondering at this point, what is approval voting? Now, the only difference between approval voting and the system that we currently have is that you can vote for all of the candidates you like rather than just one. And to find the winner, just like the current system, you just add up all the votes and the person with the most votes wins. If you click here, you can see an example of what the ballot would look like here. So as you can see, there's no major changes, just the instruction line. Simply allows you to vote for more than one candidate. All right, next slide. And like I said, my name is Ammon Gruwell. I'm the Vice President of Utah Approves. If you could just click a few times, we can get through some of these. So why do we want to adopt approval voting? What is it really? What do we gain by allowing voters to vote for more than one? So first of all, we save time and money because since we eliminate some vote splitting, we can actually get rid of our primary election. So we can go straight to general election with all the candidates. Next, it allows for honest, expressive voting. Since you can vote for as many as you like, you can actually support all of the candidates that you would be happy with winning the election. And so you can be much more expressive. If you only like one, that's fine. You can just vote for one. But if you like more than one, you can vote for more. Like I mentioned, it avoids vote splitting and spoiled elections. So let's say that candidate A is in the race and supports position in 1 and 2, but now candidate B jumps in and also supports 1 and 2. Well, they would naturally split the vote between the people that would support positions 1 and 2. And so by adopting approved voting, all those voters can actually just vote for both of those candidates that support the positions that they like. Next, approved voting produces clear winning mandates. So when you have a crowded race, and you can only select one candidate, the winner often ends up with maybe only 35% of the vote. We saw that in the gubernatorial election for the primary gubernatorial election here in Utah for Spencer Cox. He only won with 36% of the vote. With approval voting, all people who liked Spencer Cox in this case could have voted for him, and you typically end up with a much higher winning percentage with approval voting. Next, it also maximizes voter satisfaction with consensus winners. So since people can express truly how they feel about every candidate, you end up with the candidates that are liked by the most people actually winning the election. And finally, it's much more secure and transparent and easily auditable than many other alternative voting methods that you may be familiar with, such as ranked choice voting and others. And we'll talk more about some of these points in future slides. So the first thing that we want to talk about today is savings. So in our research on how much was spent in North Ogden for the elections, we actually saw that in the primary election in North Ogden, about double was spent compared to the general election. So you see on this graph up here, it's about 21,000 compared to 11,000 during the general. I can go ahead and click a few times there. So as I said, in 2021, 21,000 was spent on the North Ogden primary election. Approval voting can be conducted in a single election, which would eliminate this cost and save taxpayers money. Cities already struggle with voter participation in general elections. So in North Ogden, there was only a 40% voter turnout in 2021. Primaries are a lot worse. Last year in North Ogden, there was only a 29% voter participation in the primary. So basically by eliminating the primary, not only are you saving money, but you're encouraging more voter participation and giving the state who gets elected to more people. Another thing that kind of makes eliminating primaries attractive to a city is that voters rarely get more familiar with candidates or change their vote between the primary and general election on the municipal level. You can click a couple times here. So for no problem. So for those who do, you'll actually see that you still have the same amount of time to learn about candidates between the primary and general elections, but you just only vote once. So for those who want to get more educated about their candidates, they can. For those, like most people who usually don't between these two elections, you still only have to vote once, so it makes it a little bit easier. And then lastly, it saves election officials time from having to run two elections. That way they can focus on other important parts of their job. All right, so let's talk a little bit about simplicity. Simplicity is really one of the biggest benefits to approval voting over some other alternatives. So approval voting is extremely simple for everyone involved in it. First, for the city. So city typically is involved with voter education, helping voters know what they're needing to do. So very little voter education is needed with approval voting. So North Ogden is already using multi-winner plurality voting, where a voter can select, let's say, two candidates on their ballot when there's two seats that are up for grabs. So voters are already comfortable with voting for more than one. There would just be no limit to the number that they could vote for in this case. So it's a very simple idea. Next, it's simple for candidates. One of the biggest complaints that I heard from candidates this past election in cities where they were using ranked choice voting, another alternative, was that they were constantly needing to explain how to vote to their voters. Voters were relatively confused about how to vote and then also how it's tabulated.
Sorry.
No, you're good. And so candidates can go back to focusing on real issues. They don't have to focus on how to vote. Also, with under approval voting, the strategy is very simple for a candidate. They just want to appeal to as many voters as they can. It's not necessarily just appealing to your base. You want to be approved by even voters who might like another candidate as well. And so you really want to appeal to as many people as you can. Next, approval voting is simple for voters. They only have to vote in one election instead of two. The ballot instructions are very simple, and with approval voting, it's almost impossible to mess up your ballot. So you have much lower spoiled ballot rates. Finally, it's simple for counties. Just click once, I think there. And click a few more times, sorry. So there's no new software required for counties to implement approval voting. The ballot size remains unchanged. With ranked choice voting, you tend to get a much bigger ballot, whereas with approval, the ballot is unchanged. And then finally, elections remain precinct summable. That just means the tabulation, the counting of the votes, it happens at the precinct level. It's not all gathered into one place centrally, providing a single point of attack for a bad actor. So keeping that distributed maintains the security and auditability. So the next thing we want to talk about is how approval voting produces clear winners. Now this does this in a couple of ways. The first way is by producing higher winning mandates. Now what a high winning mandate means is that it shows the full support that a candidate has in an election. As Ammon alluded to earlier, he mentioned the 2020 gubernatorial primary, where you saw Spencer Cox win with about 36% of the vote. The reality is that he had a lot more support than that in the state, but people had to choose between who they wanted to support in that primary because they were only allowed to pick one. By instituting approval voting, this would show the full support that every candidate has in an election. So by the end of the day, the people who win are almost guaranteed to have a majority and maybe even higher than a majority with 60% or more, even in multi-winner races. And it also makes both candidates and voters happier and more confident in who won because they can see how much support was actually given to them at the time of the election. Now, a consensus winner is a similar thing. Approval voting performs extremely well on this metric called Bayesian regret, which I'll go into here in a second. Basically, all that math measures, though, is how happy the overall electorate is with election results. And again, that produces those higher winning mandates and consensus winners that makes people confident in the people who were elected. You can go ahead and click to the next slide here. So this chart is just a way to show how Bayesian regret works in different voting methods. So there's a few on here, but I'm just going to direct you to that middle one there, where it shows plurality voting. So on these two measures, we have group satisfaction and simplicity. And in plurality voting performs very well in simplicity. It's a super simple method. You vote for one, you add up the winners. It doesn't perform that well in group satisfaction. We see this, and this is kind of the reason that people are looking at alternative methods right now, is because the current system that we use doesn't actually leave the overall elector very satisfied at the end of the day. If you direct your attention to the far top right there, you'll see approval voting. It's as simple, if not even simpler, because it's impossible to spoil your ballot, so you can just vote for as many candidates as you actually support. But then it also performs very high on group satisfaction. You can see compared to all these other methods, it's very high on the scale, but also performs high in simplicity. So we consider it the best bang for your buck, reform that you can do. Yeah, so how has approval voting worked in real life? It's been used around the world in various different places. It was used for papal conclave, so choosing a pope for 400 years. Venice used it for 600 years. It was used in the Greek legislature this past century for over 60 years. And then the UN General Secretary is elected using this method as well. So widely tested in various areas. Here in the US, it's been implemented in 2 cities, so Fargo, North Dakota, and St. Louis, Missouri. And that was just in the last few years, and they've had a few successful elections in those cities. If you click a few times. So the results from that election, we did some polling afterwards, and we found that voters were very happy with how it went. They enjoyed using it. They appreciated its simplicity. They would want to use it again, and they supported expanding its use, and all of these metrics by wide margins among the voters who liked it. And it did result in much higher winning percentages and confidence in those winners. And with that, I think that concludes our formal presentation. We just wanted to open it up for any questions.
You want to step up to the podium there? Try to stay a little bit more.
Ricky's got presentation.
Yeah.
Just Reed Miller, North Ogden. I just want you to go over what the consensus winners was all about. Okay, and I didn't really understand what you really meant by Bayesian regret computers. Yeah. Went over too fast.
Yeah, so a consensus winner is essentially choosing the winner that the most people in the electorate are okay with winning. To me, that is the ideal way to measure a voting method. If you're not electing a consensus winner, then what are we doing with elections? Approval voting just happens to perform higher on that metric than most other voting methods do, and that's why we support it. As far as Bayesian regret goes, that is just a method that, there's some more complex statistics behind this, and it kind of gets into the weeds, but basically all it measures is how happy the electorate is after the election. So if you do a poll of voters to see how happy are you with the results of this election, Bayesian regret will measure that accurately. So currently plurality voting is usually going to produce a very low score because there's only a certain amount of people who emphatically supported the candidate who won. And then a small amount of people who were okay with that candidate, and then about half or more of the population who really didn't want that candidate to win. With approval voting, it provides the ability for voters and candidates to feel safe, truly expressing what they really want to express. And what this means is that it allows people who get elected to actually represent the population at large, because people are able to express their true preferences. And this produces a very high Asian progressives. Yeah, just a quick example on the consensus winner. I mean, let's say that I'm a meat lover and Nate's a vegetarian, but we both, I love steak and he loves, tofu, whatever. But we both like pizza, right? Approval voting would tend to choose pizza because it's something that we're both happy with. It would be a consensus choice, even though I'm much more passionate about steak. So that's kind of how that voting method leans in its results.
Okay. Ricky, do you have something you'd like to add?
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I have a presentation as well. You'll see actually some of the same or similar slides as to what they were doing. So if you wouldn't mind pulling that up. As they're pulling up the presentation, let me say that the county clerks throughout Utah, we are not endorsing of approval voting in any way. For us, the reason I'm here and the reason that we are interested obviously is it is a policy decision for you as a city council and for the legislature to decide on what manner of voting you would be using. Right now, state law prevents you from selecting approval voting. However, there are bills in the upcoming session that would alter that. Our thought is right now we have our current system, plurality voting, and then right now there's only one alternative available to cities, and that is ranked choice voting. And I've already presented to the city council about ranked choice voting in the past, so I'm not here to talk about that at all. However, if you put the two of ranked choice voting and approval voting side by side, you can see some very distinct differences between the two methods of voting. This presentation is based off of a presentation I gave to the legislature last spring that compared ranked choice voting and approval voting. I'm not going to do the comparison part, but I'm using the same fundamental part of the presentation just to demonstrate approval voting from an election administrator standpoint. Let's go to the next slide. This is a big summary of what all of the things we're going to look at. Basically, we're going to look at approval voting through the eyes of voter experience, through election processes, and then we'll look at costs. Next slide. First, let's look at the ballot look and feel. As they mentioned before, it's the same length as the traditional ballot for approval voting. There's one additional line of instructions. Instead of saying vote for one candidate, it says vote for as many candidates as you approve of having in office. And so it's really the same, almost identically same ballot. Next slide. Voter exhaustion is if a voter is presented with a very long ballot, they begin to get exhausted towards the end of the ballot. And there are various measurements on what the voter exhaustion rate. Approval voting doesn't increase the length of the ballot. And while there may be a little bit more exhaustion rate because you have to look at multiple candidates and cast your vote for possibly multiple candidates, really the exhaustion rate is close to zero. Next slide. This is one of the big benefits that both ranked choice voting and approval voting have over the current system that we have, and that's gaming the system. Every election system can be gamed by a voter saying, I'm going to vote. I know this candidate's going to win, so I'm going to express my vote this way. And that happens in every system. However, in the current system, it's a lot stronger where this has to happen. Whereas with approval voting, as well as ranked choice voting, the opportunity and motivation to game the system are much lower than with the traditional system. Next one. You already saw this one. This one shows the mix of group satisfaction and simplicity for the traditional system that we currently have, and then approval voting. Next slide. Transparency is a big one for us, and this is the explanation for ranked choice voting, how you would explain how it works. And then on the right, it's approval voting, and you can just see it's just a far more simple, a simple process, much easier to explain how the winner is selected. Next slide. So that's the first part, the voter experience part. Let's go on to the next section, which is from an election administration standpoint. Go ahead and go to the next slide. That's these next few items. One more. First off is processing time. With approval voting, we really don't see any change as far as an increase to the processing time, because all of the processes don't change with approval voting from what we do now. Next slide. Adjudicated and spoiled ballots as well. There are no more overvotes. Now, an overvote is simply when if it's a vote for one and you accidentally or intentionally vote for two, under the current system, what that would do is that would kick it out for adjudication. And adjudication is simply two ballot adjudication specialists or two election judges take a look at your actual ballot to see if they can identify what your intent was in marking that particular race. If they can agree, then they can actually make sure that the system has recorded that your vote properly. If they don't agree, then they simply leave that race alone and let the system read it the way it was. With approval voting, you don't have to worry about overvotes. The one drawback is if you accidentally do overvote, the system would not then catch that. Normally, if somebody makes a mistake and accidentally votes for two candidates, we tell them just scratch out the name of the candidate that you don't want and write a big no next to that and circle the other one and put a big yes, and we would catch that in our system. If we did approval voting, we have to come up with a different way to do that, and there are ways to do that, but it's not as quite as intuitive. Next slide. Tabulation results, whether it's single winner, multi-winner, there's no change with approval voting from our current system. Next. Releasing of the results, again, no release or no change from the current system. We simply will add additional votes as additional ballots are tabulated. And this is important. This is for statewide results as well. Next slide. Auditability is very important, especially now with the more recent attention that's been drawn to elections. It's very important that we can conduct audits that are very easy to understand and clear and transparent, and most of all, easy to verify the accuracy of the results. Currently in Utah, every county has to conduct at least 3 audits per election. And under approval voting, those audits would take really the exact same process that they are doing now. Next slide. Plurality, both ranked choice and approval voting, more or less solve the issue of plurality. You still have the option under both of them to not have plurality. We saw that in Sandy City, where the mayor won with 51% of the final round of voting under the ranked choice voting process. But in reality, if you compared it to how many voters completely voted, it was more like 43%. So it wasn't a true majority. With approval voting, though, you are almost certain to get more than a majority. Not guaranteed, but mostly certain. Next slide. That's comparison as far as election processes, and next slide we'll talk about cost. So let's go one more. We did some comparisons of cost to educate voters on the difference for ranked choice voting. Now, this was done prior to the elections in 21. And so the Salt Lake numbers there at the bottom are simply estimates. So they estimated about 15 cents per voter to educate them on approval voting versus 46 in ranked choice voting. Next slide. This shows what they already talked about. You could avoid a primary election by moving to approval voting as well as ranked choice voting. However, it's not you don't save the entire amount of the primary election simply by removing it, because you do have some additional costs that would come to in the form of voter education. Next slide will show that too. So Salt Lake County did this comparison. This is the net savings. The ranked choice voting in Salt Lake would have saved 15% by eliminating their primary. But under approval voting, they would save 85% of their election costs by eliminating their primary. Next slide. So this is kind of an overall comparison, but it just shows in the area of voter experience, election processes and costs. Approval voting does look to be pretty simple to understand from the voter perspective, pretty simple to administer from an administrative perspective, and pretty effective from a cost perspective. Next slide. I believe that is the end. That's my office direct line and email, and you are more than welcome to call or email or come in and visit. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Ricky, I know when you came and talked to us about ranked choice voting, you were pretty much adamantly against it. Am I sensing this is something you favor?
I think if you're going to, if you want to try something other than the traditional format, the traditional kind of plurality election, I think approval voting shines head and shoulders above ranked choice voting from all the various aspects.
I guess my real question was, are you recommending that things change since you're the election official? Do you think this is more beneficial to the voter?
It's so much of a policy call. It's nice to toy with the idea of I don't have to choose one or the other. That provides the voters some choices, and I think it would bring. I think it would manifest the voter, the majority voter preferences a lot better than the current system. So from that standpoint, I do see that a lot better. I see approval voting as being superior to the traditional method. The plurality, it doesn't concern me, but I know it concerns a lot of people, and so approval voting would provide benefit there. The one concern I have is it's just tradition, and people are used to the regular vote for one, and there's the perception sometimes that if you alter that, you're giving participation trophies out to everybody or something like that. But I would say from a philosophical standpoint, approval voting is superior to your traditional vote for one plurality type voting.
Okay, I think as we analyze this, we've got to make sure this is beneficial to the voter, not necessarily to the candidate. So I think that's something we definitely need to analyze. So thank you. Thanks, gentlemen, for your participation tonight. Any questions for Ricky? Councilmember Extra?
Do you see any drawbacks? I mean, I'm seeing, yeah. I mean, as a voter, I mean, there have been elections where I was like, oh, you know, I'm gonna have to choose. And so I think I probably should educate myself a little bit more about the difference between these two candidates. I can't find an appreciable difference, right? And so I'm just like, okay. And then it kind of gets set aside. And then I think sometimes when the election passes, and I'm like, oh, I never did decide, right? And so what I'm hoping that if we go to something like this, it's like, oh, you know, I'm kind of a smorgasbord kind of, you know, so it's like, I like that, I'm gonna like that, you know, and so I like it, but I'm just racking my brain trying to think of a downside. Can you think of any? Have you seen any?
The only two downsides I can see, one is the issue of overvoting. So if you accidentally overvote in an approval voting situation, you would then have to probably request a new ballot, which is not a problem. We provide those all the time, but that's one issue. The second one, I have no numbers to back this up. The second one deals with the eliminating a primary. That's a great cost savings. It's nice for the voters in that they only have one. It's nice for the candidates. However, I do get the feeling if you have a large number of candidates in a general election, I think some voters get tired and they're not going to do as much research as they would if there were only two candidates. I have nothing to prove that, or I have no examples other than anecdotes. I heard the folks in Sandy City talking about how they were pretty tired after looking at 8 candidates for mayor and trying to research all of them. It's a lot easier to research for 2. Those are the only 2 potential drawbacks that I can see with approval.
Can I come up here and ask him a question?
We'll let you do that.
I'm Keith Ashdown, and if we get
vote for a lot of people? Is there a chance in Central the County, Commissioner?
Could you speak up? I can't hear you.
Oh, can we put on a
I'm just
ballot?
kidding.
You got me, yeah. Can we put on the ballot, and please don't take this wrong, people in here that have run for election, but can we put on the ballot, none of the above?
That's it.
I mean, because there are times that there's just nobody out there. That might be an interesting thing to see.
You know, that's a really interesting point. Some states do allow for none of the above. And in fact, in Arizona, I want to say it's about 10 years ago, that candidate actually won. It was in the primary and it was a vote for none of the above and that candidate won. So, or that lack of candidate. So yeah, that is possible. I don't think Utah law allows for that, but it is done and has been done in other states.
Councilmember Severing?
Ricky, I was just curious now, have we seen in places, cities that have used this approval voting? Is it getting more people out to vote? Is there some reason why it would help more people vote? Or are we seeing, because that's always been a traditional problem, it's just crossing your fingers and hoping that you have a good voter turnout.
Yeah.
So is there another byproduct of having more people vote through this?
An excellent question. The city of Fargo has done this, I think, a couple of years now, and it was initiated through a voter initiative. And in St. Louis, they had an election early last year. I don't have the numbers on the actual turnout, whether that increased voter turnout. I don't know if the Utah approved stuff.
I also don't have the exact numbers, but they did do polling on that, and I think there's a lot of factors that affect voter turnout. So it's hard to say exactly whether or not approval drastically increased that turnout. But according to polling, there was at least the perception that it did increase by a fairly wide percentage. People believed that it had increased turnout. And one other point I'd make is not just, it doesn't just affect voter turnout, but we mentioned it affects the ballot spoilage. Ballot spoilage might not seem like a big issue to many people. I mean, even if it's only 2%, let's say, I mean, for a nationwide election, that 2% is literally millions of votes, millions of people going to cast a ballot and then their ballot is thrown in the trash essentially. And so just the fact that approval voting drastically lowers the ballot spoilage rates, I mean, it's essentially increasing the number of ballots that are actually being counted.
The only thing I would add to that is and he's right, turnout is very difficult. It's really the main driver for turnout is what's on the election or what's on the ballot. If it's a mayoral race versus city council, generally if it's a mayoral race or a gubernatorial or president, that drives turnout a lot. The one number I can give you is regarding vote by mail in low turnout elections such as primaries, vote by mail generally has been proven to double turnout, voter turnout for those.
Thank you.
Councilmember Swanson?
Ricky, you mentioned that the legislature's looking at this in the session that starts in the next 10 days or so. Are they looking to make this an acceptable method for a period of time? Do you know what they're looking at doing? Or is it just a general discussion at this point?
No, there actually was an interim bill that was proposed. There was a bill proposed last year by Representative Robertson from Provo that was defeated in committee. In the interim, there was a bill proposed by Senator Thatcher from West Valley to add approval voting to the municipal option. Right now, you have an option of traditional or ranked choice voting, and this would have added a third. That was also defeated in committee in either October or November. But I understand that there are additional attempts both from Senator Thatcher as well as Representative Robertson to run a similar bill in the session to have that simply added as an option for municipalities. And if it sounds like something that North Ogden City would be interested in, I'd recommend you contact your legislators as well as those two specifically.
But didn't you say that Sandy already did it, approved voting?
No, Sandy City did ranked choice voting.
Ranked
Yes. 21. We had 23 cities in 2021 participate in ranked choice voting elections.
Thanks, Ricky. All right. Gives some information to consider in the future. So thanks for your attendance this evening. Once again, before the microphones went on, I did excuse Councilmember Dalpaz. He had a family trip planned long before the election, so he's enjoying his family, so we'd excuse him tonight. We'll enter into our consent agenda tonight. Council, I would call for any conflicts of interest that you may have to disclose based upon our agenda this evening. Does anyone have anything to disclose? All right, we'll move on then. Looking for an action to consider approving the November 9th, 2021 City Council meeting minutes. Hopefully you had a chance to read those. Are there any corrections? Anyone found? If not, I would look for a motion to approve the November 9th, 2021 City Council meeting minutes. Do we have a motion?
I move that we approve November 9th, 2021 City Council meetings,
Thank
meeting
you.
minutes.
Thank you, Councilmember Severing. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Swanson. All in favor of approving those minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. We'll now move on to item number 4 on our agenda tonight, which is a presentation by Dylan Hill, our Public Works Inspector. He's going to talk to us about Coldwater Meadows Phase 3 subdivision, conditional acceptance on that. And then I think he has another one, Majestic View townhouses. So
That's correct. Coldwater Meadows, Phase 3 is a very small addition. There wasn't any streetlights, just a few 100 feet of water and sewer. They got lucky with the weather and were able to pave it. So all the improvements minus the sidewalk, that's just waiting till the weather gets better to lay that are in and up to city code and standard.
So your recommendation is approval, conditional approval?
Correct.
All right, Council, Dylan has made a motion, a suggestion anyway, to approve conditional acceptance of the Coldwater Meadows Phase 3 subdivision. Do we have a motion to approve that conditional acceptance?
Mayor, I move that we grant the conditional acceptance of Coldwater Meadows Phase 3 subdivision.
Thank you, Councilmember Ekstrom. Do we have a second?
I second that.
Have a second by Councilmember Severing. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? None. Okay. Dylan, you want to move on to the Majestic View Townhomes subdivision?
I can definitely do that. With this subdivision, I was able to invite Councilman Severing to join the walk around the area, and we checked all the improvements. I would extend that invitation to any council member that would like to go out to there. They are missing one street light and paved access down that to a sewer manhole in the corner. But those funds are being withheld until they get those in. So, but all the other improvements are up to city code and standards.
So recommending acceptance.
Yes.
So Councilman Severing, how were the ADA ramps? Were they good?
The ADA ramps were, let's see, I'm trying to remember, was that
Those are
was
the
in good shape?
truncated domes. There's actually, if you look at the plans, they have all these parking structures, right? And there was the truncated domes and warnings. They were all in and present. The ADA ramps were, I even got my tape measure out because the street sign was on the sidewalk, and talked to Lauren with it. I was concerned about that, so, but it's got 3 feet of clearance, so.
So was Lauren concerned about it too?
So he told me I was getting a little extra
Dylan, we appreciate your diligence in inspecting these and making sure they're up to code. So Dylan has recommended the vote on acceptance, preliminary acceptance of this. So all those do we have a motion?
So moved.
So moved by Councilmember Swanson. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Ekstrom. Any discussion?
Oh, I just have a quick question. Dylan, are these the townhomes that are behind, or excuse me, to the north of the cannery?
Right, yeah, right there.
Okay.
So,
It was a very cold day. Dylan was kind enough to bring hot
Oh.
chocolate chip cookies.
can't promise that.
It was
Next
quite.
time.
Going the extra mile, wasn't
It
it?
was quite a event.
You probably shouldn't say that on record.
All right. So we have a motion. Any further discussion? Okay, council, we have that motion to approve the conditional acceptance of the Majestic View townhouses. All in favor, say aye.
I,
Any opposed? Thank you. Now I'll go to item 6 on our agenda, which is public comments. I would just remind all of you, if you would limit your comments to 3 minutes. State your name and if you're a resident of North Ogden. And please, no one take this personal, but I think I would encourage those who want to make comments to avoid personal attacks. Keep the information prudent to the decision. So with that, John, if you would watch comments for those who are online. And then those who are here present who would like to make a comment, if you would step up to the podium. Please limit to 3 minutes, and once again, state your name and if you're a resident of North Ogden. John, anybody online?
Nope.
No one here? Going once? Still nobody, John?
Nope.
Okay. Public comments then will end, and we'll go into item number 7. And this is a discussion that will be led, I think, by John Call. Our planning director, Scott Hess, I believe, is officiating a wedding this evening. So he's unable to be with us. So John will make the presentation. This is a discussion and action to consider an ordinance related to accessory dwelling unit code language relating to converting existing homes to auxiliary dwelling units.
Thank you, Mayor. So, council, this is an ordinance that came as part of the next item that would be presenting as well, the Coupe subdivision. The idea is that our current ordinance, as interpreted by our planning director, basically says that you can't take the existing home on a lot and turn it into the accessory dwelling unit. And we have several people in the city who've expressed some interest in building. They might have a large lot and have some interest in building a larger home on their lot, but retaining the existing home and renting it out as an accessory dwelling unit. But our code doesn't let you build an accessory dwelling unit larger than the existing unit. And so what this ordinance change allows is for you to convert the new unit into the primary dwelling and the existing unit into the accessory dwelling. And the only caveat is, and it's this kind of first sentence that says that the building has to have been there for at least 5 years. And that's something that Scott has in the language here. The idea being that you can't build a tiny home and then a large home. You should build a large home first and then a tiny home, if that's your goal. But it's up for, obviously, the council gets the final say. The planning commission made a recommendation on this. I believe it was unanimous. For approval. The idea being that this allows for more housing options and flexibility. There's still quite a few standards for accessory dwelling units as far as space. They have to still have to meet certain setbacks. There's some size requirements and things, and that's not changed by this ordinance. It's really just allowing you to take the existing unit and turn it into the accessory unit so that you can build in theory, a larger, newer home for the landowner. And it still requires that to have an accessory dwelling unit, it must be owner occupied, meaning the owner has to live in either the primary dwelling unit or the accessory unit. That's still in our ordinance as well, so.
So John, I don't want to put you on the spot, but when it exempts this from the following standards as listed there, 11-10-34, I believe this language was lifted from the county who has a provision similar to this. However, their 5-year statute basically says you can convert it to an auxiliary dwelling unit after that, and you're not subject to basically any of the previous provisions. Frankly, I don't have a problem with people if they build a smaller home and then build a larger home. I don't know where the 5 years comes into play. I think in the county, actually, you can do that. You can build what will ultimately be your auxiliary dwelling unit first, call that your primary residence, and then when you have the ability to build a larger home, you can convert it as long as it meets the standards at that time. So I don't know if the 5 years is that big of a deal. You end up with the same result. I don't think it's going to be a lot of people doing that, but in today's market, people may have to do that, get into a starter home, so to speak, before they can upgrade. And I just hate to see a 5-year period of time, as long as when they convert it from a primary residence to an auxiliary dwelling unit, that it meets the code at that point in time. So just a thought. Any comments or questions?
I had the same thought here. It seems like that 5 years is irrelevant.
Yeah.
Councilmember Ekstrom?
Yeah, I was thinking along the same lines, like right now, construction materials are so expensive, and I think if, say a young couple moves in and they can afford a plot of land, and they can afford to put a little house on it, and their kids, they haven't started their family or whatever, then they can put that in, but then, construction prices go down or something, and then they're ready. I agree. I think we don't need to put limitations on it as long as they're meeting the codes and going with it too. I don't see why they have to wait 5 years. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah. In the county situation, if you wait 5 years, you're not subject to any of the auxiliary dwelling unit provisions after 5 years. That was the 5-year benefit there, so. Councilmember Swanson, did you have a comment, any thoughts?
No, the only thought I've had is, as I've thought about this is, I think over the years, we've tried to limit when we make changes to enable better housing or more affordable housing. John, I think you can remember some of the meetings where we're concerned that this is going to take over the entire city. Right? It's easy to get caught up in that mindset. I feel the same way about this 5-year thing. I don't think it's a limitation that we need to put on there, because I don't think it's something that's going to adversely affect the city or adversely, take over and just, it's not the board coming to us and like to start that.
John, do you see anything that would be detrimental by eliminating the 5-year provision?
So it could cut both ways, and that is, it's typically going to be the neighbor's expectation. So if the neighbors have someone come in and build a home and then build a second home, it's going to be a little more dramatic. But at the same time, neighbors who are next to an existing home and now have a larger home built, maybe closer to them or in an area that they typically have some views or things. So it's probably gonna cut both ways a little bit, but I don't think there's a strong reason why or why not the 5 years matters. I don't know if Brandon is here and attended all those meetings as well, and he might have some insight different than what I remember from the planning commission about the 5-year home being established for 5 years before being converted to an ADU.
I don't have anything from the planning commission. I just
I know as Scott and I discussed this, that the one issue that came up with us is that I think that Scott was looking at it from a perspective of people, building something that they want to build and not having spec home builders come in and trying to build both at the same time or build one, plan to just do two right at the time. So there were some concerns about it, that having them take an approach where they were just sort of default building this. That was, as I recall, that was more Scott's concerns, but I hope I'm reflecting his thoughts accurately. So.
We still have the provision that both have to be owner occupied, though, right? They
One
can't
of
be
them
rented.
One of them has to be owner occupied, not both. So the point being that one being owner occupied provides an incentive to, it aligns the interests of the property owner with the interests of their neighbors, right? If they pay a consequence for a rowdy tenant, then, the neighbors don't pay that consequence without them paying it too, so.
But theoretically, someone could come in and build both homes at the same time, right? A primary and auxiliary dwelling unit.
Yes, that's, if you remove the 5-year provision, then that would be possible. So that was, I think the point is that, you're not getting de facto building of accessory dwelling units. Or if you take out the 5-year provision, you could be in a situation where, home builders are just going and looking them as two family dwellings that are typical and building a number of those around the city. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but there's a general expectation around the city that these are single family home zones. And so it was trying to provide a little bit of a buffer between planning on this for certain, in a large share of the lots and, doing it for people who are really wanting to build, that on their own. So.
Mayor,
Councilmember Swanson?
I'm a little confused because this ordinance allows an existing building that is classified as a single family to be converted to an accessory dwelling unit. Doesn't say anything about both being built at the same time. If I'm a builder and I have a lot and I want to build both at the same time, I haven't established a single family home that I now want to call an accessory dwelling unit. Right? So this ordinance wouldn't even apply. I can build both now on a lot if I wanted to. Right? If I had an acre lot and I wanted to build a home in a smaller ADU or a small home in a larger ADU, I can do that. This ordinance wouldn't apply to that situation at all. This ordinance, as I understand it, specifically applies to like the Denny Coupe situation, where there's a very small old home that is a great size for an ADU, but it isn't sufficient for a family dwelling and they want to build their own home on there. So they want to take the single family and convert it to make it now the ADU. That's my understanding. And my misunderstanding, John, Brandon?
Go ahead, John, and I can.
This
follow.
is a converting, it talks about converting an existing dwelling.
So that is the thing, and what Councilman Swanson's saying is true. So but it's because that smaller unit typically is going to be in front of the new unit. And these exceptions to the following standards typically deal with the size variation between the two, as well as the positioning of that accessory unit. So it allows, right now our ordinance prohibits an accessory dwelling unit in the front yard. This allows it in the front yard when it's converting a house that's been there for 5 years to the accessory dwelling unit. So the idea is, again, it's that neighbor expectation that you're basically, this is almost like creating flag lots, because typically the smaller unit was required to be in the backyard and be smaller, so less imposing, whereas this will allow larger units in the backyard, which may have the feel of flag lots, but not every situation is like that, because like on a corner lot, it doesn't have the feel of a flag lot, it has the feel of two separate homes. And so every situation is a little different and unique. But I think that's the reason why there's the because there are some exceptions for where it's positioned on the lot in relation to what now becomes the primary unit.
But that would only apply if the initial building already exists.
Correct.
It wouldn't apply if it's just a vacant piece of ground and I want to build my home and an ADU. In that case,
Yeah, so
the
that,
ADU would have to be in the back, the smaller unit would have
Correct.
to be in the back.
right. So the 5 years forces the new ADU that's built on a new lot with a new house to be in the back as opposed to the front. Like you're saying. So you couldn't have when you have your compound up on the hill, you can't have your gatehouse out in the
That would be the mayor.
So,
Any other questions, council? Any further discussion?
I still won't see a need for the 5 year personally. But the rest of the council.
We could go ahead and pass the ordinance as written tonight, do some further investigation. I think tabling the motion tonight would defer Mr. Coupe, which I don't think any of us want to do. So we have really, I think, two options. Pass the ordinance as is or amend the ordinance. If we pass it now, we can surely do further research, get Scott, make sure we understand what it just doesn't seem like there's a lot of opportunities for this to happen in the city. It seems like we've been trying to provide affordable housing in different ways in the city. Auxiliary, huh?
You have an ordinance number?
We do, 2022-01. So those are the options. So I'd be looking for a motion, council, to either amend or approve ordinance number 2022-01. If we amend it, we'd have to have, I think, John tell us what it is in front of us before we could pass it. So we have the ordinance in front of us. So what's your pleasure? Looking for a motion.
Mayor, I move that we approve ordinance number 2022-01 or amend it. I don't, how do I need to put the language in? Removing the provision for 5 years prior to the date of application.
so would this be the right language where it would say an existing single-family dwelling unit lawfully established prior to the date of application? So you just remove the at least 5 years?
That's what I would do, because I mean, I really, as Councilman Swanson pointed out, I think it really is geared toward like the Danny Coupe situation where there's a house there. If we're gonna go into, if someone's gonna build two, they're gonna have to be subject to all of these standards already. So I think just this particular ordinance is about one that's already existing, correct? So that's, to me, is that what, are you understanding that too, Phil?
Councilman Barker.
My opinion on this, I have no problem in the 5 years, and this is giving exceptions. If they're gonna buy a lot and build a small home, and then their plan is to build a big home, they should plan accordingly and put it in the back. This is letting them put the smaller home up front because it's already existing. It's not letting them say, well, we're gonna put their smaller home up front and then we're gonna turn around and build a big home behind it. If they're gonna do that, they have to wait the 5 years.
That seems really unusual. that someone-
Right, which is why I have no problem with it, because if your purpose is to buy a lot to build a small home and a big home on, you're gonna do it right, and you're gonna put it where it goes. So don't give them the exceptions of letting them put it up front. That's my thought, follow our standards and put it in the back. This is just saying that the small home has to be pre-existing for 5 years. Which kind of doesn't allow them to put the small home up front.
Well, it would, they just have to wait 5 years.
Right.
Right?
But that means they're not gonna buy their lot now and then build their small home up front, knowing in the future they're gonna turn around and.
You would hope they would build it
Right.
in the back,
Mhm.
but you never know.
Which would follow our standards and not get all these exceptions that are listed on those numbers.
Okay, Thank you for
So
your
that's why
comment.
I think it's better to leave the 5 years in.
Okay. Councilmember Severing, did you have a comment? So
I can
raise your hand.
see where Councilwoman Barker's coming from, but to me, I just don't see the necessity of the 5 years, so.
Okay.
We're not gonna have, it's not like this is gonna be something that's gonna take over North Ogden, so. Most people are not gonna be building a small ADU, but sorry, Phil.
No, you're okay.
Councilmember Swanson?
John, with the text amendment that you just made, can we pass this tonight as that is showing? Or does it need to come back?
So you can pass it, so the council can say yes, no, or amend for anything that comes from the planning.
And we can pass this amendment tonight.
Correct.
And that would allow us to move on to the next, I think, if I'm understanding mayor's concern, is that we don't want to inhibit our ability to take care of the next item on our agenda. Right, and remedy that situation, which is what this ordinance amendment change is all about. That type of situation, this won't.
The two are in some way opposed to each other. So the second one deals with the infrastructure required for a subdivision. By passing both, then the council would be giving the Coupes the options for which path they wanted to go forward. By passing one or the other, it gives the Coupes the option. So if that makes sense. The idea being that
Sorry.
most likely, I would probably anticipate if this ordinance is passed, either way it's written, the Coupes will take this option because it's the cheaper option. The
But
second
this
item,
will enable anyone in that type of a situation to do what the Coupes have proposed.
correct,
Right, it won't disable it, we can pass it as amended, it won't leave them without an option to utilize the land that they purchased.
right, and the next item is basically dealing with deferring certain improvements related to the Monroe Boulevard if a subdivision occurred.
Right,
So if the council didn't pass the ADU ordinance, then the only way for them to build a second unit would be to subdivide.
right.
Which is, it would be a more relevant discussion, although they might still prefer the subdivision over the ADU, but
I'm just looking to make sure that we're not inhibiting.
right.
I think the only thing that would inhibit them is if we tabled it.
Yeah.
John, is it a deferral or is it actually elimination of those costs along Monroe Boulevard?
It depends on the way the council would like to approach it. So we could eliminate the requirement or defer the improvements. I think there's some costs, or there's some recommendations from engineer and others
Okay.
on what the right solution is.
On this one, I'll second Councilmember Ekstrom's motion to amend.
Okay. We have a motion to amend the proposed ordinance of 2022-01. Any further discussion on that? This being an ordinance then, we have a motion and a second. We'll do a roll call vote. Councilmember Barker.
Yes.
Councilmember Severing.
Yes.
Councilmember Swanson.
Yes.
And Councilmember Ekstrom.
Yes.
Ordinance passes as amended. Move on now to item number 8. John, I also believe you'll be presenting this in the place of Mr. Hess. This is a discussion or action regarding the Denny Coupe minor subdivision located approximately 2858 north, 750 east. John?
Okay, thank you, council. So I'm going to pull up a map of the property.
Thank you.
Because that'll be more relevant to our discussion than the other information we have to us, which is limited. So need to orient myself the right way. So the property we are talking about is at 750 east and 2850 north. And this is the home that under the ordinance you just passed will become the accessory dwelling unit. And the Coupes will be building a home in this area for their family forever home.
Is that home the little one?
That's a garage. This is a house.
Okay. Sorry,
Yeah, no, there's several new structures, but yeah, this is a garage and this is the
all right,
home.
thank you.
And this is another barn. That's this whole property used to be farmed by the Story family. I think there's still some orchards there, but if this property is subdivided, then it would require, there's a street here, and the city owns the Monroe Boulevard street. And our ordinance would require, as currently written, full street improvements, curb, gutter, sidewalk. And I'm gonna shorten this conversation down quite a bit because I think the Coupes will not pick this option. But the question to the council is, if they subdivided and the council felt like it wasn't important to put the road improvements in because it's a road to nowhere, it's extremely expensive, then what sort of improvements would the council be willing to consider? The benefit obviously to the Coupes is it's way cheaper to subdivide, gives them the ability to sell this house off and separate it from the home they're planning on building. The flip side is the road is likely going to go in someday. Somebody has to pay for it. And when the road goes in, there are people who benefit from it, typically the neighboring property owners. There's quite a few property owners. This is Bates Elementary, but there's a road alignment that in theory goes all the way through here. The city owns from here to 3,000, so from 31 to 3,000, and from 2850 about to this line. So we're missing this much in the middle. When we bought it, it was only from people who wanted to sell. But what I'm saying is, when that road goes in, there's going to be some property on either side of the road that has the ability to be developed. And that provides some benefit to the neighbors. So the question that the staff says is, if you waive all the improvements, then the city eats the cost. If you put it all in now, it could go bad before anyone ever uses the road and the city eats the cost. And so it's, like I said, I think it's a fairly short discussion for the council in the sense that my anticipation is the Coupes will probably just move forward with the accessory dwelling unit, the main family home. And because it is here and the city owns the right of way, they'll have to follow all the setbacks and keep it far enough away from that right of way that there won't ever be a future conflict with the home they're proposing and the city's right of way. So we can talk about the general concept of deferring improvements, and if the council would like us to head down that path for the next situation that may pop up. Staff does anticipate we'll bring back a half-street ordinance to the council meeting. It's not a true half-street. The idea is that if someone's bordering, putting a road in and the road not only serves their property, but another property, they're not required to do curb gutter sidewalk on this side. They only have to do curb gutter on one side with enough width for fire access and safe vehicle passage. That's something we're bringing back anyways, but sorry, that's probably more confusing than it's worth. But I really think the Coupes will opt for the ADU ordinance. I do think Denny was going to try and be on tonight, but they did have a family activity, and I don't see him on here. So, any questions about this? Does the council? It might be good for staff to know in general. Does the council like the idea of deferring improvements, or do we always want to require them to go in? I see heads nodding up and down, and I see heads shaking back and forth.
Let's see if we can get you an answer on it.
Okay.
Councilmember Barker, what are your thoughts?
I'm not a fan of deferrals because we've had an instance a couple of years ago with the homeowner over on, what was it, 2750? Is that the road, John? With next to the Ivory Homes subdivision, and he actually bought the home after a couple people after the deferral, and he had to put curb gutter sidewalk in, and because it was on the land, side of the land, and he had no say over it. So
yeah,
a deferral, I mean, if the Coupes stay there their whole life, great, but most likely people move and the deferral will still be there and future homeowners will have to pay for it.
yeah. So this home, the owner, the person who subdivided moved into this home and said, I will pay for half of these road improvements when the road goes in because I'm always gonna live here. And then they moved and the person who bought this home found out they had a $40,000 bill on their title report when it came due.
So it wasn't listed on the title report when they bought the home?
It was, but most people don't review their title report and plats and things.
Hmm.
So if you ever buy a house, look at the plat very closely and read the entire title report.
Yep, that's true.
And that's my opinion of why I don't like deferrals.
Okay,
But in this instance, I'll get to my recommendation here in a minute.
okay. Councilmember Ekstrom, your thoughts?
I mean, to me, it makes sense to do a deferral until more of it's developed, right? We're not, I mean, we put something in, it's just gonna, it's a road to nowhere. It's, nobody else is gonna be even using that forever. It's just gonna be an investment that sits there and decays. So, and then if they do the accessory dwelling unit, I mean, is this really only an issue if they choose the option to subdivide? I mean, what happens when the road goes in and it just goes by their house? Is it, how is that gonna work?
So subdivision improvements, road, curb, gutter, sidewalk are only required when a subdivision occurs. So pulling a building permit doesn't trigger the subdivision requirements. In fact, with what they have proposed, there will not be sidewalk installed because they're not subdividing.
Okay.
Whereas if they were subdividing, they had planned on putting sidewalk here. They just didn't want to do the road improvements.
Well, why would they subdivide, John? They can build the home now with the passing of the ordinance. Why would they subdivide?
So that's why I think that's the route they'll go. Originally, they were gonna subdivide. This was intended to be an investment, rehab the house and make some money to help pay for the new home. But under the new path, it'll end up remaining a rental more than likely.
So
But if they ever wanted to separate them, then they'd have to subdivide.
if they ever decided they actually did want to sell that and no longer wanted to be landlords, then they could say, okay, now I need to subdivide. And then we have this discussion again.
So John, why would we be entertaining this motion for need without knowing if they're gonna subdivide? Because if they don't subdivide, this is irrelevant, right?
Right, so that's why I was saying that the two things conflicted. If the council had said no to the ADU ordinance, then they would want an answer on this. Because they would like to start the construction of their home and likely move forward with the subdivision. But where they got the affirmative on the ADU,
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying, it's kind of,
I don't see why this would be, I guess they could possibly, but why would they select this? Particularly if we don't grant a deferral, and even if we do grant a deferral, they ultimately have to pay. If they can accomplish the same thing without incurring all these costs, I think Denny's a pretty smart guy. So is now the appropriate time to be,
well, so it was on the agenda. I just wanted to see if the council had thoughts on this. And I do think it would be helpful for staff to know, because this comes up every year. Do we defer sidewalks? Do we defer improvements? And I get the general feeling that we're undecided, and maybe we should bring that back when we bring back our half road width conversation, that we can talk about it more in depth at that point.
and even if they defer this, what basis do we have that they'll be in a financial position to ever pay for it when the road comes in?
Correct.
Councilmember Swanson.
John, if you can quickly, can you pull this up into GeoGizmo?
Sure.
The crowd is mesmerized.
Okay, so that's perfect right there. If we see this, the area we're talking about right there, and if you go above that, that's already subdivided, right? That's why the lines are the way they are.
On the county records, it shows a subdivision. We have an issue with the way these two parcels were separated. that we need to work through with the Stories and the owners of this home.
Okay, but there is already a subdivision there.
Not a legal
It's
one.
It's an illegal subdivision.
Okay, how about,
This property was legally subdivided and this property was legally subdivided.
how about the one above that?
This was part of the remainder of those two and legal.
Okay, so we have one there that's an illegal subdivision. We have three that are already subdivided, so that would not trigger participation in the road because the subdivision already took place, correct?
Correct.
And then we have all along the right side of the right of way there, which is the Carney property,
Correct.
which will never be subdivided because they're plunking their house and their RV garage in such a way that that won't be subdivided. So that won't trigger the road being built there,
In theory, correct, yeah.
in theory. I mean, you can never say never, but pretty much. So what we're really looking at there, other than that one illegal subdivision, is a road that nobody's gonna be triggered to build,
Right.
other than the city. So this conversation is really kind of moot, in my opinion.
Yeah, because
for
what you'd
this
be
area in
doing,
particular.
you'd almost be penalizing them as the ones paying that portion. Now, I would like, is there any way, John, we can figure out how to get that sidewalk along 2850? Am I understanding that there is a sidewalk along there now, and by doing what we did earlier wouldn't require?
So there's a sidewalk that goes to the edge of the Carney property and then a sidewalk that ends right here. But there's no sidewalk the rest of the length.
And under this situation would never have to be one, right?
There never have to be one. The city has in the past done special improvement districts and put sidewalk in and added it to utility bills or taxes of the landowners.
Doesn't that require 100% landowner agreement?
There's different provisions, but there's also times when the city just puts it in at the city's own cost. So one of the issues with the reason this illegal subdivision is kind of a big deal is when these properties were carved off of this remainder piece, the Stories signed an agreement that said they wouldn't subdivide any further without going through the full subdivision process. And then they carved this piece off. So they've been able to sell property to several people without ever having to put in any additional sidewalk, for example.
Which causes then the city to be taking it in the shorts to put the entire road in.
Or that we're the bad person imposing it on the people who didn't
Hey,
make the agreement with the city, 4 years ago or whenever it happened.
which could be quite an expensive road if we
And
end up buying. I mean, because where that comes to an end, right, John? That road where it comes to an end, the dead end. We don't own anything from there till 3000, right?
right, so we don't own through these two properties.
Well, here's my concern. When Monroe Boulevard goes through, we're gonna want sidewalks. And to Councilmember Swanson's comment, not knowing if we get a special improvement district, it seems like to me that the previous ordinance ought to be looked at and amended to say, yeah, you could do that as long as, but we're not excusing you from putting the sidewalks in there because somebody's gonna have to put that in. Most likely it's gonna end up being the city.
So this actually comes up quite often, particularly when people are moving property lines around without subdivisions in other cities. And it's because the sidewalks are tied to the subdivision of land, we can't enforce it on anyone unless they're subdividing. So unless the Coupe subdivide, we can't enforce it. Although there might be an argument that because the Stories subdivided, that they should have to pay to put this sidewalk in. But I think you've heard when I can't remember, it was a planning commission, but the Coupes are family friends with the Stories and aren't trying to rock the boat.
And I understand that. But somehow we ought to get, I guess, had maybe the council known the effect of passing an ordinance and preventing the subdivision, resulting in sidewalks not going in areas where they should be, maybe the decision would have been different. I can understand the road putting that in right now. Probably doesn't make any sense, but sidewalk. That kind of concerns me that, 'cause ultimately who's gonna get stuck with the sidewalk is the city. Most likely.
And it's gonna be a necessity because that'll. be
Yeah, it's right along Monroe. And 2850 is gonna become pretty busy.
Kids are heading up the Bates.
You could get a safe routes to school grant for, if that happens. There's options to get sidewalk lit.
You're assuring that, Councilmember Barker?
So there's options, doesn't mean you're gonna get it, there's options.
Yeah,
Well, and these.
I like sure things.
These homes up here were part of the, I want to say it was 8 years ago, maybe only 7, but the council started putting their foot down and saying, we're not deferring sidewalks. We're making you put it in. Because what ends up happening is you get subdivisions and little chunks of sidewalk here and there, but at least you're that much closer to getting them complete as opposed to, I think before these homes were required to put in sidewalk, this whole street doesn't have any sidewalk on it.
But it does now.
Only for those homes.
Yeah,
3 homes.
but it's gonna end. There's not gonna be any down at the bottom on
Right.
2850.
So the sidewalk ends here and then starts again here, but there won't be any here.
And what about on 750 East?
There's none here until you get to this home.
Yeah, so we're gonna be without sidewalk on a critical corner.
So do we have an option on that ground from the dead end to 3,000?
No, both of the landowners said they had no interest in selling to the city.
Is that would obviously be subdividable ground from the dead end to 3,000, right?
There's a home back here. And then this is open and potentially subdividable.
But at some point in time, if Monroe Boulevard comes through, it's
The-
gonna have to go through and we're gonna have to deal with it then.
Yeah, if the city decides to punch it through, then we'd either have to approach the landowner at that time or do eminent domain for it.
And that will end up being what, an 80-foot road because of the Monroe?
Let me just ask,
Yes,
A
Lauren
question.
says yes.
to kind of move this along. So Councilmember Swanson, had you known about the sidewalk, would your vote have been different on the previous ordinance?
Probably not.
So you're willing to have the city take on that responsibility?
Well, I think the sidewalk doesn't get done either way. I don't think the Coupes would subdivide unless we were, I mean, if we were willing to defer, that portion of the road.
Yeah, I think deferring that portion of the road is just, I know it's tough, but it doesn't make any sense to put it in.
No, I completely agree, but that would also mean the deferring of the sidewalk and everything else that would go along the road.
Well, let me ask John, do we have to defer the whole
Deferring that
thing?
sidewalk, why not defer the other sidewalk?
Let me just ask, would we have to defer the sidewalk and the street, or could we just defer the street?
We could just defer the street, or one option that planning staff talked about that Brandon reminded me of is, we even talked about the option of maybe trading some of these improvements for improvements elsewhere in the city. So again, and this is again, kind of a weird thing. If this was subdivided, the sidewalk would go here, here, and then up Monroe. It wouldn't connect here because the Carneys haven't subdivided. And so there's so many weird little moving pieces in this corner that it's obviously very complicated. And, I mean, residents benefit from cities building roads all the time. They do. I mean, obviously, if this was going to be subdivided, the city's already put in this road and this road. Curb and gutter, not sidewalk, but curb and gutter, and water lines, sewer lines, and that benefits that property owner because they don't have to put them in, the city's already done it. So the city's never gonna be made whole, and sometimes landowners aren't made whole because they put in stuff that costs more than they thought it should.
Yeah, and I guess I'm just looking at the safety of that area, but Councilmember Swanson has given his opinion. Dave, do you have something to add?
Can I give a little insight?
Please.
So my whole thing about this area, and this is an area that we've actually focused on quite a bit too, but and I understand where you're coming from, Mayor, that, you know, that's a lot of sidewalk that the city would have to put in. But right now, it would, even if the city did come put it in, or if we had the Coupes put it in, it's kind of a sidewalk to nowhere. If I can go up to the board, I can kind of show you what I mean by that, but. So, say we did put this sidewalk in. And like you said, because it's a corner, it is important. But we do have sidewalk across the street at that intersection, but it's the same situation. We have sidewalk from here to here, then we go 3 lots here that don't have any sidewalk, and the rest of 2850, all the way down to, I think where the junior high is at 550, none of that has sidewalk. There is a small piece going up here into this cul-de-sac. But again, 750 is the same way. You don't have any sidewalk here. You have it for 3 homes, the ones that subdivided that we forced to do it. But then above those 3 homes, again, there's no sidewalk again. So it's one of those things that's like, I don't even know how much, you know, that, and until we do like a special improvement district and do something like that, I don't think you're gonna have a lot of that connectivity. I think it's a lot of, you know, island sidewalks that kind of go to nowhere. They go 3 homes and then you end up having to get pushed back out on the road. And then, you know, eventually you can get back on a sidewalk, you know.
Yeah, so I guess I would ask, you know, why we piecemeal it with subdivisions. We do that, so ultimately knowing one day we want sidewalk all along there, right?
Yeah. no,
That's why we do it.
Yeah,
So even though we have some sidewalk that's missing, our ultimate goal is to have sidewalks all along there. So if that's our goal, I guess we just have to understand that, you know,
no, absolutely.
because the
I
council
mean, I
member
think there's some
Swanson's
areas
point.
that we won't, like, that you won't ever see get subdivided because they're already established homes and so it's, you know, it's one of those things that we're gonna have to.
So is your recommendation not to try to figure a way to get sidewalk in?
I guess I don't have a recommendation either way. I just wanted to give some insight on like where sidewalk is and isn't. You know, we've always struggled with this part of town.
The other option is we could tear out the sidewalk on those 3 homes, so we don't have a sidewalk to nowhere.
Not necessarily want to say that either, but. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the fact, right?
I just wanted to give some.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Ekstrom, do you have anything you don't want to defer this?
No, I think we're kind of in a position that we're just gonna have to wait until that becomes an issue where it's like, okay, now we do have traffic. Now we do have a safe route school zone, and then we can make it a special district. We can apply for funding somewhere else where it's like, you know, there's more other funding sources available when it becomes a safe route. You know what I mean? The safe school route, I think is what it was called. I had to do one for Maria Montessori when I was on the board there. But yeah, I think it's not necessarily needed right now. And so I'm kind of a little bit like kick the can a little bit down the road until it becomes more where we've got more pedestrians, more traffic, more everything. So
Okay,
I'm
thank you.
willing to just kind of let it sit.
John, did I hear you correctly that we have several of these instances come up each year, so we're setting a precedent here with what we're doing, right?
We do have consistently people subdividing, asking the city to defer. In fact, you've got one before the council right here.
Yeah,
I can't remember the name. Well,
the Randalls.
Randall. They would like to defer the sidewalk, which currently ends right here, but they don't own this house. So they would only be putting sidewalk here. And then along Fruitland.
But when they defer it, they still have responsibility, right, on a subdivision?
Right.
It attaches to the
ultimately-
property.
It attaches to the
What we're doing here is we're not deferring, we're we're eliminating that property owner's obligation to put sidewalk in.
By them not being required to subdivide, then yeah, it's eliminating that. Yeah, and then it might just be that it falls to the council someday to say, we're gonna identify where we want sidewalks and we're gonna do a special improvement district.
I'm back to Councilmember Swanson's comment, though. You have to have 100% of the district to approve that, because if that's the case, you most likely aren't gonna get.
I don't think you do, but I do think you have to have a majority. But I'll see if I can find out for sure for the council.
Because I would think, once people don't have to put it in, they ain't gonna vote to put it in. Councilman Barker, any comments before we move on here?
My last comment, I've already said I'm not a fan of deferrals, but there's
Are you
another
a fan
option.
of elimination?
No, but there's an option of, for example, this property, instead of deferring, you just have them pay fair market value today to the public works. They use the money where they need, and when the sidewalk needs to be put in down the road, the city will just pay for it because they've already paid their share. So instead of deferring it, you just have them pay what it would cost today. Because if we're gonna defer it, sidewalk's only gonna go cheaper. I'm sure it's the same like everything else. When was the best time to build a house? Yesterday, right? And sidewalk's gonna go up in price. So if they pay today, then it's fair today, and everybody, the city's satisfied, the homeowners are satisfied. So don't defer, just have them pay.
Of course, at this point in time, they don't have to do anything.
Well, that's, but the Coupes, yes. But they don't have to do anything anyways. If they didn't build a house, they don't have to do anything. They can live in a little home.
Which they wouldn't.
Make it add up.
They could tear down a little home and build a big home and they wouldn't have to do anything. So,
Councilman Severin?
Well, I'm just kind of curious, and I hope we're not laboring this too much, but I'm kind of curious, how do we create an illegal subdivision? How does somebody in the city create an illegal subdivision?
So
Would
somebody
we-
signs a deed to somebody else without, that gives them a portion of their land without going through the subdivision process.
And there's no way of going back and,
Well, no, so, I mean, the next step for the city is to probably reach out to the people involved and say, hey, you did an illegal subdivision.
because here, this is what I think, I mean, technically, we've created or permitted, not at our, not that we wanted to do this, but illegal subdivisions. So technically, without the Carneys having to put in that sidewalk, I think what we're saying is the citizens are gonna have to put that in, the sidewalk and the road at some time in the future.
Not unless they subdivide.
So the county is the one who records legal paperwork, so that's why we're not always involved in that process. If someone will just go down and record it without getting approval. We usually get, I want to say 6 or so of these a year, where people do boundary line adjustments and things without going through the proper process.
So just out of curiosity, what does a section of road, especially if that's gonna be an 80-foot road, what does a section of road cost?
A lot.
100, I feel like it's, I want to say ballpark is 120 a linear foot.
120,
More than that.
$120 per square foot,
Linear foot.
linear foot.
Yeah.
I expect they're going,
That's an 80-foot road, not a 60.
Let's
John's
see.
right on 60-foot, but an 80-foot would be more than.
so we're talking on a linear foot, that's a big road.
All right, well, I'm still confused about why we need to deal with item number 8. But I'm always confused, but frankly, just my opinion, I have a problem deferring, because most developments have to put that in, it's part of their cost. And we're deferring this to ultimately, in my opinion, an expense of the city. Just my opinion. So with my opinion, which means literally nothing, what do you want to do with item number 8 here? Council? Councilman Barker?
I just say we table item 8 until we hear what the Coupes want to do.
Okay, we have a motion to table item number 8. Do we have a second?
I'll second that and suggest that we bring it back with the half road work that staff is already working on.
Thank you, council. We have a motion to table. Any further discussion?
Yes, can I add something?
Yes, Councilmember Severing.
Well, I
please.
would still like to look at the idea of what would happen if we look at these illegal subdivisions, if we go back and say, you know what, this was taken care of without city consent.
Yeah, I think
there's a
we
third
will.
part of that.
I think we will go back and look at it. Just naturally, I think that was on the calendar.
Okay, it was already on there, all right.
Yeah, to deal with the situation. So,
That just for
Okay.
clarity, that's what I would say. But if it's there.
all right, all in favor of tabling the motion, say aye.
I,
Any opposed? Thank you for the discussion. We'll move on to item number 9. Presenter will be Tiffany Staley, who's our Parks and Recreation Director. She's going to discuss with us this evening ramp grant applications. We've asked that the council approve suggestions, or if they have additional suggestions for ramp grants, now would be the time to speak up. So Tiffany, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me. So each year, North Ogden City can submit to receive funding from RAMP, which stands for Recreation, Arts, Museums, and Parks for Weaver County for projects in Parks and Recreation through matched grants. To date, I'm happy to say the city has received over $2 million in funds and has been able to complete many projects, including park benches, restrooms, basketball courts, tennis court surfacing, playgrounds, funding for the amphitheater, and theatrical performances at half the expense it would have cost to do these projects alone. For this coming year, the Parks and Recreation Department has 2 project application proposals for the council to consider. And these projects requested from RAMP would require a minimum 50% match for the total project cost in order to receive that grant funding. The first project is improvements to the trailhead at the intersection of 2750 North and Mountain Road. So this trailhead is the busiest trailhead in the city, and it has only become more so since in the past couple of years, we worked with the Trails Foundation of Northern Utah, formerly Weaver Pathways, who put in a connection from this trailhead up to the Bonneville Shoreline Trail that runs as far as, from Willard all the way to Ogden. It runs for miles along the mountain. And we've seen quite the uptick in utilization of the trail since that point. Right now, the trailhead is a mixture of dirt and gravel. There are not really good boundary lines to where to park, where the parking lot begins and ends. There's a portable restroom up there because of demand, and there is no lighting up there. It's become an issue at times because of the increase of people and darkness. And so we hope that by beautification and improvement in this area, that not only will we make it a better trailhead, and we'll make it safer and more usable as well. The second project that we are proposing for grant application is the addition of theatrical equipment, lighting, and audio for the amphitheater at Barker Park. So construction at the amphitheater stopped short of installation of sound, lighting, theatrical equipment needed for a variety of events and productions. And so for each of those that have been held in the past, we or other individuals who've used the facility have had to bring in lighting and or sound in order to make the facility usable. So we'd like to take that next step in building completion by installing house sound and lighting equipment for theatrical productions, kids camps, Music Mondays, reservations, and other uses of the facility. As capital expenditures, both of these projects requires a significant amount of engineering to completion. Current budgets no longer include the funds for these types of engineering expenses. So this has proved to be a little bit of a challenge in planning future projects for us because detailed plans and equipment lists aren't available to budget off of. So we've done, taken the information that we do have and reached out to other experts in the field to help provide us with some budgetary numbers for these grant applications. If these grants are awarded and the projects go to completion, fully engineered designs will be required for both of these projects, and there's additional costs associated with those. So for the trailhead improvements, we were able to get some ballpark numbers, really rough figures from the city's contract engineer to help us have those numbers for grant funding, and that includes trailhead improvement design and project management. This is the re-engineering and overseeing of the construction by the engineer. Restroom costs are ballparked between 110 and 160,000 for an installed facility. 8 years ago, our restroom cost for a larger restroom was around $200,000. And that was before the significant inflation that we've seen in construction costs. So we are listing that number at about 140,000 for a smaller 1 to 2 on each of men's and women's side restroom. Utility connections would need to be made from this location to the nearest utilities, which the manholes are on 2750 North. And again, the engineers provided us a really rough number of $20,000 in order to put in those lines in that manhole. And then the engineers also estimated, this was the city's contract engineer, they roughly estimated for us a parking lot of grading pavement, striping and bumpers for a total rough number for this project of $238,000. So the city's match at 50% would be about $119,000. For the second project, the equipment at the amphitheater, we reached out to several audio and theatrical lighting companies in the industry and worked with them to come up with budgetary numbers based off the engineer's estimates and the facility plans from 2017. So they provided us the estimates that they provided. Most were within $10,000, either over or under, one for audio, one for lighting, of those estimates that were provided by the engineers in 2017. So we feel pretty good about where their numbers are at. And in the last 5 years, one of our concerns is that a lot has changed in the way of sound equipment and lighting. Technology has improved. And a big factor in that is the heavy reliance on LED lighting. It changes the draw of the electricity and what's required. And just some of the products that are spec'd out on that engineer's sheet are either no longer produced or they're obsolete because things have advanced so quickly. So if grants are awarded and this project goes to completion, we'll work with an engineer to determine the best fit for the facility based on facility needs and make sure that that plan includes the newest technologies and energy efficiencies. So total for that, based off of those engineers' numbers, are $295,000 with a 50% match being $147,500. So if these two projects are approved by the city council tonight, we'll finalize those grant applications for submission to Weber County by the end of the week. They are due by Friday at 4 p.m. So we'll get those turned in. And if you have any others, let me know right away and we'll see what we can do with those as well.
Tiffany, just a question. We've had quite a bit of vandalism in our parks and with restrooms. We've talked about getting internet access and cameras to try to minimize that. Does this include any of that in the proposal? Because I think we might want to increase it to do that.
Okay.
I think the other thing that I would ask is that on the audio systems, that we assess any inventory we may have that could be helpful in reducing that cost.
Absolutely.
And then I'm assuming when you use the term theatrical equipment, you are talking about lighting.
Lighting and the rigging for it.
Yeah. One other thing that we've had discussion on in regards to the amphitheater is that we talked about the city, our 50% would be 147.5. We've talked about that being contingent, our match with raising that basically 73,500 from citizens that are interested in that.
Raising half of the city's match through
Yes.
citizens.
Is that feasible?
It's never been done before, but it doesn't mean it can't be.
Well, if we put you in charge of it, I think it could happen. So anyway, those are my comments.
I would give it my best shot.
Okay. John, would you like to share maybe with the council before we entertain discussion here and ask Tiffany any questions? Maybe these two items were listed on our priorities as suggested by the council. Where do these rank?
So out of the 14 items that were listed, the sound system and lights at the amphitheater was number 9. And then the Trailhead was number 13. And just to help remind a lot of the things that would be ahead of both of those were police officers, police building, water system, long-term financial plan, RDA, enhancing economic development, which ties into our 2700 corridors, and then emergency preparedness and preservation of natural waterways. So those are some of the ones that are ahead of that. Some of those the council has already funded. Some of those don't require necessarily significant amount of funding. But there are some up there that do require some from the city, and some from the general fund, some from utility funds.
It would seem the only major one preceding these priorities would be water, where we have quite a substantial commitment to infrastructure. I think all the others, the police building's already in the plan. We're looking at some things on hiring and retaining police officers. May cost some money, but I don't see that coming out of the capital improvements fund. I think that would be more of an operating situation. So just wanted the council to have that information. So with that, do you have any questions of Tiffany? She asked a very important question at the end. Do you have any other suggestions for which we'd like to apply for ramp grants? So any
Even if
comments?
they are suggestions for 2023's round grant.
These were actually suggestions for 2021. Tiffany. So, okay, council member Ekstrom.
Okay, so generally they go under a category, right? So it's the R, the A, the N, and the P, and usually like the A is easier to get than the R and the N and the P.
Correct.
So which ones, where do these two fall?
The trailhead falls under the recreation and parks. And the amphitheater, I actually have a call placed into the county that hasn't been returned yet on where they would like it sorted. I do want to say to ease of getting a grant, it's just been that in the past, less has been applied for on the art side. So that's why it has appeared easier. The process is the same.
I should qualify that. It's like there are just fewer competitors and
There have been, yeah, in the past.
Okay, cool. And then my last question is on the amphitheater, it goes to the mayor's with like, is it secure? You know, before we put a bunch of expensive equipment in there, I make sure it's secure and enclosed, right? Do we have it actually weatherproofed to the point that this equipment's not going to be exposed to, you know, extreme heats and cold?
Yes, the inside of the amphitheater still needs some flashing up along the top edge, but it's not something that I think would inhibit any of the equipment that we put in. And then to his note about cameras and vandalism, the amphitheater actually does have cameras up there. There is not internet up there, so the storage on those is downloaded as needed, but it is accessible.
We need to get kind of the ring where the guy whistles if somebody comes by, scares them off. Because otherwise, you know, it is hard to do that. I also would suggest that, you know, we use any expertise we have in lighting and audio to help minimize the cost if we can. Don't mean to pick on engineers or architects, but sometimes that's not the main thing. And I believe if we look at, for instance, the trailhead, our engineers have been pretty good at overestimating lately, which is good. One of the things that I think hopefully in the application, Tiffany, we talk about is I happen to live where I can see when that flag goes up, the number of people that come into our community. And they're not all from North Ogden. This is basically a county-wide situation. And I've always been concerned about I guess the message we send what our city's like when they pull up on that road, no curb, no gutter, potholes, pulling into a situation where it's dirt, see 3 or 4 porta potties. It's always been a concern. So
Did you have anyone in specific that you wanted me to reach out to?
I think we have probably several people in the city that could help us. So
Okay.
we can just talk about that
Sure.
later. Councilmember Severing, do you have any questions for Tiffany? before we
No
enter into
questions?
discussion, okay?
No
Council?
question. Well, I comment, I would just say that in the spirit of what Neil, what the mayor was saying, that we could, I'm sure, get community people involved in that process. So whether it's fundraising, whether it's active, like kind of working there, whatever may be the case, I think we can do that.
Absolutely. I will give you for context. So the city's largest celebration is Cherry Days, obviously. And the largest amount I have ever seen fundraised for that event is $22,000.
It's a good start for you.
Absolutely.
I think there's significant interest from many parties here, foundations or whatever it may be. I think we approach and at least we give it our best shot, like you said.
Absolutely.
But we're saying, sorry, Mayor, can I make a comment? Are we saying this? Turn your mic toward me. Are we saying this for what we would need to, we would obviously need to earn of 147,000, we get fundraising efforts and that. That's what we're
73,
saying.
half of it, half of the
So we can
147.
still apply for the grants.
Yeah, you actually don't have to use it.
Right.
The council could make that decision at a later date, but at this point in time, I think it would be conditioned on, that's our goal.
We can also take a look. There are more points awarded to a grant application that has outside funding that is not tax dollars. So if the council desires to commit a certain dollar amount that will be fundraised through private funding, we can include that as part of the match to help with the points on that.
So we list 73,500 and we don't get it. Does that impair? We say that's our goal?
It would mean there is less funding available. So ramp is dependent on the commitment of that amount. It's not required in order to get the grant. We can write the grant as if the city will fund the entire amount, and then the city can do its own fundraising to augment that and help in any way possible. Or we can write the grant as if there will be a dedicated commitment of half of that funding. And you will receive a few more points toward grant application to help assure you of a received grant, but you are also held to that commitment.
So if we don't raise 73,500 from the public, it's a no-go.
Correct. It's a project completion. You would have to reevaluate your project at that
We'd have to
time.
come up with funding internally.
So maybe what we do then is we apply for the grant with the city matching its entirety, but understanding that if we don't get a substantial fundraising effort, that we may not accept the grant.
That would be up to the city council.
Okay, that's just pointing out options. Okay. Have any questions, Councilman Barker?
Just one,
Comments?
yeah. So in the last couple of years, we've rented the equipment, we've done events over there.
We rented it from other,
Do we know roughly how much that costs us each year?
no, I don't have a total for that. I could look. We've also been fortunate enough to have some of that equipment rental donated.
I
So
was just curious how much we're spending in rental fees compared to this amount. And then also, if our equipment our year estimate from 2017 is already obsolete, how often will we have to replace the equipment?
good question.
So in a couple of years, will we have to spend this much again to get new stuff?
So what I anticipate is, as I spoke with some of the professionals in the audio and theatrical industry, they prefer to come into a facility and analyze needs based on what recommendations are. So if I say to them that we are holding a Garth Brooks sized concert, they will recommend equipment for a Garth Brooks sized concert. If I tell them that we usually have a couple of community productions a year, a musical series, smaller family reservations and theatrical camp, I think they will recommend to us the equipment that is needed for that, and we can dial into where we're at. So I anticipate the cost for these actually going down a little bit.
Good questions, Councilman Barker. I think as we've talked about it, we've really set our goal as this being a regional community gathering spot. I mean, it'd be nice to have a Garth Brooks concert, but I just don't see that happening. But I do think, we talk about rental of the sound, I guess if we're really gonna use this as a community gathering place, particularly theatrical, we need lighting to attract. It's that chicken and egg thing. We talked about not making any substantial further investments in there until we could determine demand, right? But to determine demand, do we have to have these, what I would call minimum? Because I think when musicians come a lot, they like their own sound system, their own thing. So I would lean this more towards our community gathering, regional gathering. I mean, I know there's visions of having Bon Jovi come, but I'm not sure. Have they got them signed up yet?
Big Bon Jovi.
Okay, you were Led Zeppelin, that's right.
Oh, Ozzy Osbourne.
Oh, Ozzy Osbourne. Okay, do you have any comments, Councilmember Swanson?
Just a couple. One, get with me tomorrow. I have someone who is interested in helping with the trailhead. Okay. The other on the equipment, we wouldn't have to replace it every 5 years just because it's changed any more than, at the fire district, we would buy a new truck because a new truck, a better truck is now out. What we have, if we got the equipment that we needed this next year, that would be good for quite some time, even though, there are some stages that are still using halogen lighting and things like that are quite outdated. So it would last us I'm confident that it would last us for a pretty good period of time. But I like these two. They're the priorities on our priority list that we can apply for ramp grants on. And anytime we can get that other money coming in, I think that's a good thing.
If I understand it correctly, say you have someone interested in helping up there, they wanted to make a $25,000 donation. They could make that to the city, use specifically for that, and then we could use that to offset our match, right, John? So I think we have
I
options.
think it would be a combination. The individual would be probably be a combination of some direct financial and also performing doing some of the actual construction and work and taking care of expenses that way.
And I think Councilmember Severing has said numerous times, we have people in our community that are willing to help. Sometimes they just have to be asked.
Well, I have somebody that's reached out specifically about this.
So you've got somebody that's reached out, and then we'll reach out to others and we'll get this funded. So thank you. See, he didn't even blink at that commitment. He just took it.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Ekstrom, do you have any questions?
I think I'm all told.
Anything else that we should ask Ms. Staley to submit, or anything else on your minds? All right, council, you got the opportunity to ask questions. Let's seek a motion on this, then we can have further discussion.
Oh, I thought of another question. Sorry. Are we gonna do another kids camp? And if so, do we need to apply for it now?
The Arts Guild has actually put on their list that they would like to do a kids performing play.
Fantastic. That was my last thing that just popped into my head. Thank you.
So they'll be applying for money for
I
that.
don't know if they will be applying for funding for it. They just
Maybe you could help them. That would be good. Maybe that's something you could contact and make sure that I think that's been pretty successful. All right, council. I'm looking for a motion to approve the rent grant applications as presented to us by Tiffany Staley. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
So moved by Councilmember Swanson. Do we have a second?
I second.
We have a second. All right, any further discussion? Okay, council, I would say that we try to raise as much money as we can from private citizens who are interested in these two areas. I think there is quite a bit of interest. I wouldn't feel bad if we raised all the matching funds. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of this motion, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. John, you have a very short situation here on the drainage agreement, Utah Department of Transportation.
Yep,
regarding 1500 North Washington Boulevard. Please proceed.
So council, this is exactly the same agreement you saw last month, with the exception of these two paragraphs. And UDOT has decided that the development and the city facilities in that area require both agreements to be signed. So it's just a differentiation on how and where the water's coming from compared to the other one. So they want both agreements. So it's the same concept. We agreed to put very clean water into their system, be responsible for any issues that come up, and be good partners with them. This, I think, is the third or fourth of this type of an agreement we have with UDOT. And I actually believe UDOT has an agreement with us for a portion of this, of their system that comes into ours. Although, as you can imagine, it's not as formal, or it's an older agreement and not the modern one, but staff doesn't see any issue with signing this agreement.
Okay, you don't see any downsides to sign this?
No.
John, if someone were to put what you classified as non-clean water in this, I assume we have legal action to proceed against that.
They could be heavily fined by the city and the state. And then the reality is that most of what we're talking about is the facilities, but we would have recourse against those individuals.
All right, council, you've heard from Mr. Call. Do you have any questions for him? I don't see any. So this would be agreement number A01-2022. So I'd be looking for a motion to approve the agreement, which is a drainage agreement with the Department of Transportation for land located at approximately 1500 North Washington Boulevard. Do we have a motion?
And that we establish agreement A01-2022 as outlined.
Okay, we have a motion. We have a second.
A second.
We have a second by Councilmember Severin. Any discussion? I see none. Notice will be a roll call vote. Councilmember Barker.
Yes.
Councilmember Ekstrom.
Yes.
Councilmember Swanson.
Yes.
Councilmember Severin.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. We'll now move on to item number 11 on our agenda, which is a discussion or action to consider an ordinance related to the personnel policy. Mr. Call.
Thank you, Mayor. So, council, we have historically had a personnel policy which was routinely brought to the council, fully updated in large groups, and the council goes through it over several meetings and we adopt it. We are finding that to be onerous and problematic. And so this ordinance basically rescinds all of those previous agreements, or not agreements, but policy, basically says that future changes to those policies will be made with now, and this is something we would like some feedback on. Right now, it doesn't specify, but it says mayor, city manager, human resources, finance director, and the council finance liaison. So that currently would be Phil, or Councilman Swanson. But it doesn't say if a majority rules or who has to be involved in it. I would probably say the way it's written, it requires everyone to be on the same page for a policy to be adopted. But we could modify that. The hard part about modifying it is it's hard to say which one of these people shouldn't have a say in what's adopted. You know, the mayor's the CEO, so he should have a say, or she, the city manager. So I'm saying that it almost feels like it needs to be a unanimous decision, or maybe we could break it apart and say the policy has to be approved by the city manager, mayor, human resources, and the finance director and council finance liaison need to agree that that it's budgeted for, that there's not a financial impact, or not, you know what I mean, that we can pay for it.
I've never liked unanimous because it's so hard to get, frankly.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that we have input from the human resource director and the finance director. But I would say the approval would lie with the majority based upon the mayor, city manager, and the council liaison. We surely don't want to exclude anybody. I think it's really important we get their input. But I mean, you know, in staff meeting, we talk about issues and it's fairly, some issues fairly, you know, divided. So just a thought. But I'm very supportive of this. In today's labor market, things are moving very quickly, and to retain and attract people, we have to act fairly quickly. And I think with the bumper guards we have in place, so to speak, that this wouldn't expose the city. Just my feeling. Councilmember Swanson?
I think the majority of the group that you just mentioned equates to the three places: council, mayor, city manager, where the buck stops, right? Really the three pieces of the puzzle. Council approves the budget, mayor enacts and keeps that budget going, city manager manages it. Yeah, I think that's just as long as you and John don't outvote me every time.
I think we'll surely get, I know you'd want the finance manager to make a recommendation to you.
Oh,
based upon-
absolutely.
So I think we have input
detailed
there.
input from everyone is crucial.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for your comments. Anyone else? Okay, John, we have before us I guess, ordinance. Based upon Councilmember Swanson's comments, we would need to make a minor adjustment. So we'd be looking for a motion to either approve the ordinance as presented or to make an amendment and approve the ordinance. So council, I'd be looking for a motion.
Is there a number?
Yes, it's 2022-02. So the question is, do we amend it to,
A majority?
well, the three, we talked about a majority of the three?
Okay.
Or do we go as is?
So Mayor, I would move that we amend ordinance 2022-02. Giving. the
To this
police-
language.
I have my glasses on now. Yes, I like that language. So let me start all over. I move that we approve ordinance 2022-02 with the language currently written for the approval of the majority of the mayor, city manager, and administrator, and council finance liaison, with input from the human resources and finance director, with all approved changes communicated to the council and employees immediately upon adoption of any new policies.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Councilmember Ekstrom. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, this will be a roll call vote. Councilmember Swanson,
Yes.
Councilmember Barker,
Yes.
Councilmember Ekstrom,
Yes.
Councilmember Severing.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. We'll now move on to item number 12, which is a discussion or action to consider the declaration of surplus property located at approximately 1550 East, 2625 North. John Call will be our presenter.
Okay, council. So we've been approached about leasing a corner of the property just south of the equestrian park that we own for a cell tower. In order to do that under the city policies, we would have to declare it as surplus. Then we could accept actual offers. Council could discuss it in a closed meeting about what's the best way to negotiate the deal, and then could enter into a public contract. But the first step is holding a public meeting and deciding whether or not we want to declare it as surplus to start that process. Staff doesn't have a strong opinion on that. We're not sure there's a real use for a corner of this property that would affect what the city's trying to do or what the future of this property might be. But at the same time, we don't want to declare everything as surplus just because someone asks. So it's really up to the city. Market studies are funny. Some towers are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Some towers are worth $500 a month for the lease, because it all depends on how much coverage there is and what the need for the tower is. And usually the person who's managing and leasing the tower makes the most of that money, and the landowner doesn't make as much. So things to talk about, but we would, have a public hearing and then have the council decide which path you want to head down.
John, do you sense our citizens need an additional cell tower to improve communication?
My impression would be that when I've spoken with individuals who live in this neighborhood, calls can be dropped at times. So
If you
having
get-
extra cell towers would help. But typically the metrics are, the companies decide when they need new towers. The impression I get is the group who's approached this is not, they are a group who manages towers, and they will try and get a lease on our property and then go out and try and market the site, as opposed to actually having someone ready to build a tower.
Once again, just because we declare this a surplus property, we don't have to do anything.
Correct, yeah,
It just opens it up for discussion.
yeah.
Okay.
And I have been careful on this one to not declare the whole property as surplus, because I don't want to invite every developer in the world to want to come and subdivide this property.
Yeah.
Unless the council wants to head down that point at some, but it's just this little red box in the corner is
Would we
what
get-
we're talking about.
Would we be able to get sidewalks and roads?
Well, one concept is the council could make the determination on how those proceeds would be applied. And they might say, hey, we want the proceeds from this tower to go to the dog park, or to go to the police department, so that the council does have that option to kind of direct this money as best seen
We're even
fit.
going to making that a reasonable road,
A reasonable road.
a reasonable road. That part of Mountain Road is,
Terrible.
thank you.
It's terrible.
So,
All right. Any further questions of John before we open the public hearing?
Mayor,
Councilmember Barker?
do we see a potential of more cell towers coming? If we open it up for one, that you'll get more?
This would be our second one in the city, right? Third?
I believe we have some cell tower equipment on one of our water tank properties. So I think it would be our third.
Yeah, one's an internet provider, and then the other two will be something.
Okay. So then second cell tower.
Okay, good question. Once again, we don't have to do anything, right? If we have any interest at all, then we would have to. Okay, no further questions. I would open this matter for public hearing. John, if you would tell us if we have any comments on Zoom, and anyone here, if you have comments, now would be the time. You see anyone online, John?
Nope. Oh, yep, we do have a comment from Susan Kilborn.
All right, let's hear from Susan.
Hi, I just have a question tonight. Oh, Susan Kilborn, North Ogden resident. Do we have a limitation on what ramp grants and what number or dollar amount we can apply for? I don't know who to ask that question to, but one of you bright people must know.
Hey, Susan,
Yes.
you save that for public comment since this is a.
Oh,
public-
I'm sorry. I thought it was public comments.
It's no public hearing on the cell tower, but we would appreciate you sticking with us and asking that question during our public comments. So we always appreciate your comments. Anyone else, John?
Not online.
Okay, we'll step to the podium. Yes, sir.
Keith Ashdown from North Ogden. If we put in another cell tower, do we get to tell them they get I want to say camouflage it, so we don't see this big cell tower like we do by the old city lots that they, if I drive to Phoenix, they look like a pine tree or a palm tree. Do we get to do something like that and say we want it to blend in around the area so it looks nice? That's just my
Yeah,
question.
we can negotiate that as part of the lease. If we do that, this would just open up the opportunity to start negotiating. So I appreciate that comment. That's a good comment. Anyone else, John?
Sorry, trying to pull the participant list up. Nope.
Seeing no further comments here, I'd be looking for a motion to close the public hearing. So moved by Councilmember Swanson,
Second.
second by Councilmember Severing. Any discussion? All those in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
All right, so at this point in time, I would be looking for a motion declaring surplus property located at approximately 1550 east, 2625 north.
Resolution number.
Resolution number is 01-20-22.
Mayor, I move that we approve resolution 01-2022. Declaring surplus property located at approximately 1550 2625 north.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilmember Swanson. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Ekstrom. Any further discussion? Now we'll go with a roll call vote. Councilmember Barker.
Yes.
Councilmember Ekstrom.
Yes.
Councilmember Severing.
Yes.
Councilmember Swanson.
Yes.
Resolution passes. We'll now move on to item number 13. This is a discussion to amend ordinance 2021-40 to fix the lettering and number error that was in the original approval when I referred to the city code standards. Susan Nance, our city recorder, will be discussing this issue, and it's to amend ordinance 2021-40. Susan?
As I was codifying this ordinance, changing our city code, I recognized that we had just missed. We had listed it as an A and a B, and it should be a 1 and a 2. Just a very kind of cleanup item, making sure that I follow our code properly. And this is just kind of a cleanup item, so I just recommend that you make the amendment.
Okay, any questions of Susan? I don't see any. Do we have a motion to amend ordinance 2021-40 to fix the lettering and numbering error?
So moved.
So moved by Councilmember Ekstrom. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Swanson. Any further discussion? I don't see any further discussion. So we'll start with a roll call vote here. Councilmember Swanson,
Yes.
Councilmember Severing,
Yes.
Councilmember Barker,
Yes.
and Councilmember Severing. Councilmember Ekstrom, sorry.
Yes.
All right, you've got your marching orders to correct that. Move on to item number 14 on our agenda this evening, and that is to appoint a mayor pro tem with Councilmember Stoker leaving. She was our senior council member and served in that situation. So tonight I'd like to make a recommendation to appoint a new mayor pro tem. Based upon our earlier discussion, I would say none of the above. Is he here? Oh, no, my
That
mistake.
guy.
I'll second that.
Motion.
I would actually recommend that we follow our previous procedure, which is seniority on the council. That would lead me to recommend Councilmember Swanson to serve as mayor pro temp.
Think carefully.
I'll make that motion, Mayor.
Okay, we have a motion from Councilmember Barker.
I second.
Do we have a second?
I second.
Okay, now is the time to have a discussion about that. If you'd like him to get a haircut or a tie, now would be the time to have that discussion.
Can I choose between the haircut and the
Nope,
tie?
no. I don't see any discussion. So based upon that, all in favor Well, I would need a motion to nominate him, I guess. My recommendation is just that, a recommendation. Do we have a motion to appoint Councilmember Swanson as the mayor pro tem?
Didn't they just do that?
Did you do that? It's getting late. Okay. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
I,
All right. We'll have department reports right now. I don't know, these are new assignments. So Councilmember Severin, do you have anything to report to us in regards to the police?
I do. I spent 2 hours this afternoon. And in this house that will be destroyed.
How many windows do you break?
I didn't break any, but they broke 2.
Not really.
So I watched as our officers in blue, I guess probably black, but I watched as they practiced 2 different, sadly, two different domestic violence situations and how they would address them as police. And then another incident where somebody was hiding in the house. But it just helped me realize again what kind of sacrifice these men and women are making with their lives every day for you and for me. So I'm grateful for that. I sat down with Chief Quinney. He does have some things. Apparently there's been a recent legislative decision called Discovery 16. John, you got something familiar? Discovery 16?
It's a Rule 16 discovery.
Rule 16.
Yeah.
That leads to like discovery of material that should be given to the defendant and counsel. So he is proposing, and we'll see in February, as we begin budget of looking at that kind of the impact that's going to have on staff providing additional records to the court system. So I just told him to write up something a little bit more formal and we'll look at it in February.
Staffing, we're still short. Is it 1 or 2 officers now? Did we hire the other one?
No, that individual just selected the sheriff's office.
We do have somebody currently though that is in the academy, right?
Yes, we
A
did.
female officer. So there was another person I wasn't.
Yeah, we were, that'd be another person.
And to add to that, I watched a little bit of the morning exercises this morning, and one of the scenarios they were training people on, and all the officers, they had one officer who knew what was happening in the group, so there was 2 going through the building at a time and 1 that didn't, and they were getting aggressive with the assailant, and it was to remind officers that it's their job to remind their fellow officers, hey, you're exceeding protocol, you're not following. And so they staggered as they went through, and there was always one on the team that knew, or that was supposed to be basically breaking rules, and it was up to the other one to call them out on it. So it was, they're not just doing force on force training, they're also doing every aspect of training that happens with those officers. So
And actually that first in action, what do you call it? That first, trying to look at the right word, but the first practice.
Yeah.
Was actually that exact situation
Yeah.
where somebody was supposed to say, look, you're going beyond the line.
Yeah.
So it was just awesome to see them in practice, but sad that we have to face domestic violence, right?
Anything else?
Nope, that's all I have to report.
I believe we have 2 new sergeants
Yep.
in the police department.
That was not relayed to me, but see, I think I remember seeing that, but
So
I didn't think to bring that up today, so.
Officer Moriali or Sergeant Moriali and Sergeant Semsrod. So both of who have been with the department for 7 and 8 years, I believe.
Awesome.
Anything else?
No.
Let's move on then to Councilmember Ekstrom. You have Dave here if you need any help.
right?
Having it
Isn't
as your
that
new,
awesome?
having it as your new assignment. So do you have anything to report, Councilmember Ekstrom?
Oh, well, I'm just excited to be able to come work with Dave. I haven't had my kind of in-depth, real fire a million questions at him yet, but we're gonna do that next week. So I'm really excited to get to know members of his department and kind of how all the intricacies of it and how it works, and it'll be great. I'm looking forward to it. The updates that he sent to me were about the waterline project on 1500 North in Washington, as the pipe is all in and just finishing up the sidewalk and the xeriscape in the park strip. So doing xeriscape, everybody can be happy about. We're doing our bit for water conservation. And we've had a little break from the snow, so they've been doing some blade replacements and filling the salt bins back up. And so then, of course, development is just going great guns. And so inspectors have just been busy keeping subdivisions compliant with SWWWP, which I had to ask him what that was. So he's like, those are the stormwater regulations. So,
Okay.
all right, anything else? Great. Okay.
Well, I would like to report that I've been, what would be the term? I can't go out with snowplow drivers anymore because one of the trucks burned down after I did.
That wasn't the one you were in.
I know. I'd heard I'd been kind of banned from going out anymore. Is that true?
That's not true.
All right.
We'll still have you.
I do want to say, I did have that opportunity, and it put a whole new perspective. Plowing these streets is not as easy as it appears on the surface, particularly when there's so many cars still parked on the street after we have an ordinance prohibiting that. It makes the job of the snowplow operators much more difficult, but I did get a new perspective that it isn't quite as easy. So before we enter into our public comments on item number 16, I do have an item of business that John said I could do with it not being on the agenda. And that is a determination of North Ogden City regarding public meetings with an anchor location. On the 11th of January 2022, I would like to declare that pursuant to Utah Code Section 59-2407, as the mayor of North Ogden City, I hereby determine that conducting electronic meetings with an anchor location presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at the anchor location. This determination is based upon code changes in 59-2-407 approved by the Utah legislature regarding the Open Meetings Act, particularly COVID-19 cases and the need for caution in people meeting together. The North Ogden City meetings of North Ogden City in January 22 and February 2022 will be held electronically and will not have a physical location. All attendees will connect remotely, and links for public participation are available on the North Ogden City website. So beginning next week, all of our meetings will be Zoom until things settle down with COVID. It's unfortunate, but we found the registration system didn't work really well, so we never know how many people have at council meeting. So I think to be safe, we'll do that. John?
Sorry, I'm just trying to answer a question.
Sorry, we're just discussing the dates listed, so it'll be all meetings, not just city council.
All meetings,
Okay.
February through January. Hopefully, if things settle down, we can back off and have meetings earlier. But with what we know now, this declaration will cover January 2022 and February 2022. Okay? Does that answer your question, Susan? All right. With that, we'll now enter into public comments. And once again, I would remind you, please limit your comments to 3 minutes and try to focus on the issue. John, are you watching? Okay, Brenda.
Brenda Ashton, I live in North Ogden. I'm curious about the police department. How many officers do you want to have?
Well, our ratio has been 1 police officer to every 1,000 residents based upon our current level of crime. So that's our current target minimum. If we see crime rising, then we will reevaluate that. But we've been operating on basically one sworn officer per 1,000, I think, John. So that would be our goal.
And we're currently short 1 or 2, you said?
John, is it 2 or 1? Or
2.
3? 2. We're currently short 2.
Okay, I'm curious, it seems in the last little while, we've sworn in a few police officers. Is that because we were running so short before, or because we have that many who have left us?
Well, I think we authorized in the budget 1 additional officer, so we were trying to build that to 23 to stay ahead of things. But we've had officers, we've lost officers, we've lost to different departments, we've lost to the sheriff's department, and that was one of the things that motivated us to look at our personnel policies. So it's been kind of a combination, but I would lean more towards the fact that we've had officers leave.
And so the changes that you made in the personnel, has that helped to maintain officers? Have you noticed any difference in that?
We really haven't made the changes yet. We did make that salary increase to become more in line with the market, but it's been so soon, I'm not sure we've seen the results of that yet. We are going to make an additional investment to find out what additionally we can do to make that the premier place to work in policing in our county. So we are looking at that. It's always been our #1 objective is to keep this community safe. And Councilmember Severing has committed to help us become the safest city in Utah, not #5, but #1. So we are looking at what we can do assessment-wise over there to help our officers to attract and retain so we can maintain the needed police force.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Barker, do you have a comment?
Yeah, just real quick on the police staffing, it's not just North Ogden that's seeing shortages. Right now, there's an opening at Pleasant View and Harrisville as well for full-time officers, and the county is actually down, I think, over 20 officers as well. I think South Ogden's the only agency in Weaver County that's fully staffed. So it's not just us.
UHP is down, Salt Lake City's down 50 officers.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
It's
good
everywhere.
point.
Nobody wants to go into the field anymore.
What's happened with all the regulations, what I would call not lack of respect, but the decrease in respect for police officers, what's taking place has made it very difficult. I have a opportunity to discuss some things with an officer down in the southern part of the state. It was almost word for word what we're experiencing. So thanks, Councilmember Parker. I don't think it's unique to us, but we just don't want to be like everyone else. We want to make this the premier place to be an officer.
Stephanie Casey, North Ogden resident. I have the bulk of my comments written down, so I stay on track, but I did want to say that I was really happy to see the Trailhead as a ramp grant application. I think that's something that we've been hearing from the community for a while about the trails and the Trailhead, so I'm excited to see that. I do have some questions involving the need to upgrade the amphitheater. I debated even saying anything, but none of my questions were answered in the presentation. So here goes. I also need to say that I do think it's important to make that amphitheater successful for our community. With what we've paid for it, it needs to be of use to our community, and I'd like to see it successful. I'm just wondering what that looks like right now and how much money we will continue to invest without knowing. When events are talked about, they do not include any real costs or numbers. How much did it cost for the Monday Music in the Parks events this past summer? There was one question asked and no numbers could be given on the rentals. I mean, if we're gonna ask for a large amount of money to replace us renting, I would like to know what the rental costs were. I know there was a sponsor for the Monday night music in the parks, but what does that mean? What costs did they cover? What was the cost to the city and the residents for the rental of the gear, the time to open and run the amphitheater, the bands, etc.? How many attended? I know we use some of the rent money that's given to the city each year, $1 per person. Did that entire amount go to these events? I know we paid $5,000 for the Osmond. The crowd was the biggest for him, maybe around 200. We paid $3,500, $1,500 for some of the other bands. I'm gonna guess that the attendance was never over 100 at any of these other bands. I mean, are we looking at how to best use this? Was the attendance low because the rental, sound, and light equipment wasn't great? Why was the attendance low? Would we have had better turnout with permanent equipment? How many rentals have we lost due to us not having permanent lights and sound? Do we have any idea of how many people we've had to turn down or have chosen not to rent our facility based on us not having these things in place? Do we have those numbers? Are we keeping track of that? How can we gauge the need for these expensive additions without any of this information? So.
Thank you for your question, Stephanie. I think I can answer a portion of that. We do know that in its current state, it's not going to work. That much we know.
I know that as well.
Because we've tried. We've really given an effort there. I think we do know that theatrical plays put on by local actors does draw a big crowd.
I agree with that.
So we probably need to do
That's a
more
great
of those.
use.
But sometimes, and I don't want this to sound irresponsible, but sometimes you have to make the investment to find out. I don't know how many people wouldn't come because we're not prepared, because in the accounting world, we call that an understatement of income, and it's hard to figure that out. But I do think, and I would respond, and John and Tiffany can correct me, I think we have concluded that the way we've been doing music in the park on Mondays, status quo is not what we expect. We did challenge Parks Department. I think they made a good effort to try to get attendance up. Frankly, I was disappointed when we only had 200 or 300 people come to Osmond's. I mean, I thought advertising was good. He's a quality performer. Things can always be better, but there was a lot of effort to advertise him being
Yeah,
here.
and I'm not saying there wasn't. That's why I'm
Yeah.
wondering, you know.
So I
how
think
we do
the
it better.
answer is that may be something that is not meaningful to our citizens. So we are taking a step back and we're looking at that and making some adjustments. Is that true, John?
Yep.
Tiffany? So I think we have concluded we had a challenge last year that we made our best effort to determine, and so we will be making some adjustments there. But, you know, sometimes we know that its current status isn't acceptable.
I agree.
Right.
And I
And
just
you
wonder.
heard me say when I campaigned for this job, that making substantial additional investments, and there would be based upon determining demand. I think we can only determine demand if we get it to where we looking at it for its intended purpose, which is a community regional gathering place, hopefully more theatrical involvement. Once again, people can shoot me, but you know, I don't see how we're gonna attract major concerts there. We're competing against Ogden City, we're competing against Layton. I don't think that's in a condition to do that, but based upon our current definition of use there, and I'm, you know, about as tight as you can get, I think we need to make this investment to find out what the real demand for that facility
And
is.
I agree that there are definitely investments that need to be used, need to be made, especially for theatrical performances, which I'm all about, because you know, we talked about property rights and bands there. I almost have to leave my home to be comfortable there in the evening. And I know that that's, saying that is, you know, is terrible, but it's the truth. It's the truth.
So I took up part of your 3 minutes, so I apologize, but you're pretty
You
close.
did take some of my time up, so.
But you're pretty close.
Hopefully, the permanent ones we can put in, can keep the sound in the bowl as promised from the beginning. And then finally, on the police, I do want to say that, speaking about the police and the army department going in, I was disappointed to see in the connections as the sheriff's highlighted, which is great. But I would prefer to see North Ogden police officers highlighted. Thanks.
Yeah, John, I don't know, we have final say on the content. So I think that's a good point. Even though we are part of the county, you know, priority would come to our North Ogden officers. All right, do we have anyone online?
We do. First is Susan Kilborn.
All right, Susan, please.
Okay, first of all, I apologize for inserting my over exuberant self in an inappropriate manner, but I'd rather say I'm sorry than not participate. So my original question was, if someone could please answer, are we limited to the number or amount of dollars for ramp matching funds?
We're limited to the number of grants we can apply for.
So limited to the number, not the dollar amount.
No, not the dollar amount, because the largest grant is above $300,000, and I don't know that there's ever been a cap to that.
Okay. I know I saw some quite large ones from other cities in the last year, so I'm not aware of a dollar cap, but we are limited to the number. What is that number, Tiffany?
That's 3 of the easy grants, $2,000 and below, 3 of the regular grants between $2,001 and $199,000, and 1 of the major grants above $200,000.
So let me repeat, 3 small under 2,000, 3 medium up to basically 200,000, and then 1 major grant, which would be over 200. Does that answer your question, Susan?
Yes, it sure does. And that's something to consider, because we might want to portion that out based on what the city's needs are. So thank you for that. Have a great night.
That's per year. That's not in the aggregate. That's per year, just to clarify.
Yeah, I figured per year. I'm under 3 minutes, by the way, Mayor. You don't have to shush me.
Well, maybe we'll deliver you a gift.
Gosh.
Push the snow into her driveway.
Yeah. Dave said if you go over 3 minutes, he's gonna push all the snow into your driveway. Anything else, Susan?
Oh, I already muted her. I thought she was done. I'm sorry. Susan, raise your hand again if you want to say more.
Susan, that wasn't me. That was John. I want to point that out.
Okay, she's back.
Okay, continue, Susan.
No cookies for John.
Well, no cookies for the mayor either, apparently. Anything else, Susan? Did she mute herself, or did you do that again? John?
She's unmuted, but I'm assuming she's done it now. So.
Okay, are you done, Susan? We must have lost contact. Okay, who else do we have, John?
We've got Dallin Barker.
Dallin Barker. Can you hear us?
Hey, yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Sure, so go ahead, please. Your name and residence?
My name is Dallin Barker. I am a resident of North Ogden. My comment is one of caution. I know it's easy to go, oh yeah, a grant's going to help us pay for this, but grant money still has to come from somewhere. It's still us paying taxes. And if we're legitimately trying to lower tax threshold like everybody wants, we can't just be spending on frivolous things. So, I mean, I don't have a problem with a trailhead. the amphitheater, I have a really hard time justifying any spending until we really figure out what's going on there. Because I know we've tried music in the park. We got Osmond. And you yourself said, yeah, I was kind of disappointed with the turnout. Well, are we not renting the equipment that we want to put in there? If we're renting low quality stuff, what's even the point? If nobody wants to go see Mr. Osmond, we're not going to bring in Garth Brooks. We're not going to bring in Nirvana. We're not going to bring in any of these big names. These bands will not come to North Ogden. And so I think it's kind of silly trying to figure out, well, will permanent lighting bring in? What's the point? If we can't even attract people for smaller groups, we're going to spend 10 times as much to try and bring in a bigger group and maybe attract a group 5 times the size. Well, that ratio doesn't factor out. And that's where I go, let's use some caution. Let's not do anything without really thinking everything through, because at the end of the day, it might not be directly North Ogden money, but it's coming from RAMP, which is coming from county and state, which all of us pay taxes to county, all of us pay taxes to state. So that is my comment.
Okay, thank you, Dallin. I think we've made the decision that we're not going to invest in this to bring in big bands. Our design on this is to bring in regional community events. That would involve, for instance, I could tell you the Arts Guild is looking at trying to think of a North Ogden's Got Talent type of thing. We're looking at bringing in theatrical performances there in the summer. I don't think we're designing this. I think we found out that at this point in time, the city is not, that's not their major attraction to that facility, is Monday night and the music. Now, some family activities and things that we can use that for, but let me just clarify, we have discussed this and made the decision of what we're seeking right now. This is a regional community gathering place. We're not seeking to have, these big bands come here. That's what we're seeking to utilize this facility for currently.
And that's where I go, well, we've brought in smaller groups and we've seen that they don't work either.
Right, so that's one thing we're making the adjustment on. We found out that's not successful.
Yeah, but yet in my mind, what I'm hearing is we found out that doesn't work, but we know that these regional plays like Joseph and the Coupe and some of these other things have worked. Well, what's wrong with the sound that we do have? What's wrong with the sound that we have been renting? If we've been renting the sound, which, I mean, I heard the question asked, we don't know how much we've paid to rent sound and lighting. But if we're paying $10,000 to rent this stuff and we're paying $100 to rent this stuff, but yet we're going, okay, we need to buy $15,000 worth of equipment. Well, if we're only paying $100 to rent this stuff, that's 15 years worth of rentals. It doesn't make any sense. That's what I'm getting at, is let's make sure we're really thinking about all of this and make sure we have numbers, because what I heard tonight, we don't know what the numbers are. We don't know how much we've been spending. We don't know anything other than what we're doing doesn't work. And we don't know how much
I think we know how much money we've spent. We have records of that.
Yeah, but we don't have the answers tonight. So I'd like to just.
But I would also tell you, Dallin, not to get in any argument publicly here.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, sorry, I'm not trying to argue.
Please tell me any other amphitheater in this state that's in the condition of ours for use. I can answer that question. 0 is my understanding.
And I agree, but I think we can all agree.
I think we can be successful in its current situation. We've proven that we can't. So anyway, thanks for your
Well,
comment.
Yep, thank you for your time.
We have Susan Clemens.
Susan, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate, Mayor, that you, I guess, in the city council have decided to go to Zoom virtually starting next week. I appreciate that. I've loved watching city council over Zoom, and I'm pretty much here every Tuesday night. And there's a good reason, because we've got a really bad COVID numbers. And I want to also point out that this is a pretty hard time to gauge demand for the amphitheater during a pandemic. I'm over 65, a little bit over 65, and I didn't feel comfortable attending the performances because there were so many people. And yes, it was an outdoor venue, but I still didn't feel comfortable. So I think you need to maybe give the amphitheater another year. Hopefully we're going to be done with this by this summer. But just be careful gauging your numbers during the pandemic. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. John?
I must have a technical difficulty with Susan. She's got her hand up again. So
Okay.
we should be able to hear Susan if she'll unmute herself.
No bad. That's my bad. I'm going to dinner. Goodbye.
That's it?
Yep, that's it.
All right, enjoy your dinner.
I will.
Enjoy your dinner. Thank you
Then we
for
have
participation.
Meryl Sunderland would like to make a comment.
Okay, Meryl?
I'm trying to unmute. Have I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay, you can hear me. I would like to spend about 20 minutes talking about several items, but
You'll have to
instead,
call a different number then.
a different number. You have a different number for me.
I
Good.
give you your 3 minutes, so go ahead.
Instead, I am going to simply say I need to add my voice to the last two comments about the amphitheater. I think they were very well considered concerns. There's no question, like Stephanie Casey has said, and by the way, this is Meryl Sunderland, was that clear, I guess? There was no question that we do need more permanent fixtures to make this amphitheater more effective. I think that's not the question. The last two comments were caution about going in the direction with the numbers of the amount and the ramp funds recommended when this is a lower priority item on your list, on the list of priority items. And we should have a little better discussion about what the need is before we go to the let's just go ahead with what has been said. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Once again, just a reminder, if the grant is given, doesn't mean we have to accept it. But if we want to have that discussion and have the resources to do that, we need to proceed. And we're surely open to having more discussion about the amphitheater. I've yet to have anyone come up with a better idea. So if somebody has a better idea, we're always open for that. Anybody here?
So we got Randy Wynn.
Randy?
There, can you hear me now?
Yep.
I thought it was a good discussion about the ramp applications, and I do support what you decided on those. I think we need to get that amphitheater to the next stage so that we can fairly consider the questions about it. So I support what you've done here tonight on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. John, anyone else?
Nope, not online.
Anyone else here? No one? All right, we'll move on from public comments and we'll seek comments from the council. Have you heard from citizens on issues that we need to be aware of? Councilman Barker?
So I'm just following up on what I said I would last month. Quick question for Dave. How many water connections do we have in our city?
Water connections?
6,000?
Close to 7,000.
Well, last year we issued 596 building permits. So almost 1/10 of the water connections that have been in our city have been issued. So we're growing fast. And I'm not an accountant, but that's over 1.6 building permits per day. And this year we've already issued 9 building permits in 11 days. And one of them's right there.
Yes, should I get one?
Well, you applied for one. I was told that yours was one of the ones that got issued. So you.
Thanks for the information.
You're gonna get the bill now.
Maybe I just said something I shouldn't have, but.
Wow. Perfect.
I'm just following up that no, I'm no longer over building and planning, but last year was a busy year for us.
It was, including inspections. So we've really got to look at that. So thank you, Councilman Barker. Councilman Swanson, anything you've heard from citizens we need to be aware of?
No, I did attend a meeting on, let's see, today's Tuesday, it was last week, with a couple of state representatives, several actually, 3, some county representatives about affordable housing. And where we are in the state. And right now, from the number of people who would like homes versus the number of homes that are available, we're 46,000 homes short in the state of Utah. 46,000, and it's been hovering right about there pretty regularly for quite some time now.
You probably took Economics 101, right?
Well, I
Some
think I
point
took,
Supply and
I
demand.
took 090A,
The
yeah.
remedial course. Remember that supply and demand? When supply is greater than demand, it creates price increase, right?
It does.
And that's where we're at. It's unfortunate. The state and the county keeps talking about affordable housing. I always ask, what's the definition of that? Because I found nothing that's affordable. You can't buy a house in North Ogden for under $450,000 with a 20% down payment. Your P&I would still be around $1,700. You add insurance, you're paying $2,000 for a home if you can find one at $450,000.
Yeah.
So, and what happens is we just keep bringing more and more businesses in, creating more and more demand with a short supply, and it's just so cyclical.
We're still about 2.5% unemployment.
Yeah, it's
So
crazy.
Lowest, one of the lowest, if not the lowest in the country.
Yeah.
And we have quite a labor shortage, so there's jobs for people to come here, and then you have the folks that are fleeing the high tax states that are coming here.
It's a dilemma, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty bleak. The outlook as far as, this being a bubble or something like that, that's gonna burst. No, we have people coming from all over the country where housing is much more expensive than it is here. I spoke to one realtor, wasn't you, Blake, but I'm just pointing because you're a realtor.
I was gonna say,
A
right now,
realtor.
I learned statistically this last week that a third of the sales in Utah are going to outside of state, so.
Right.
There's just people bringing so much money.
Is organic inside. But this realtor mentioned he had a client that came in that sold a 2,800 square foot house in Central California along the coast for about $4.5 million. Had lived there, 35 years. So the equity that they brought with them, they came here and it's like, okay, we want that house. We'll pay $50,000 over asking. and it's an all cash deal, so. You know, it's our own kids, it's our own families that are being priced out of these homes because we've got to do something. And we don't want the state to take preemptive measures.
Right.
That we all
Well, mandates, unfunded mandates, right?
They're very good at telling us that
What
we
ends
have
up
to do
there.
things that cost us
And
money.
I know they're doing the best they can, but just to support your comment, most of you know where I live. There's no $1 million homes up there. The house across the street just sold. And I was talking to the guy and I said, so what enticed you to buy this home? And he goes, man, it was under $1 million. Because he's from out of state. So he thought he was getting a deal at this amount because it was under $1 million. Pretty crazy. Anything else?
No.
We will be receiving a presentation. Do you want to talk about the CJC presentation that was made? They'll be on the agenda coming up.
CJC, sorry.
Children's Justice Center. The request for funding of a
Oh,
new
the
facility
request for funding.
from ARPA funds.
No, I think we'll wait until that presentation comes.
All right.
It'll be easier to understand with the presentation.
Councilmember Ekstrom, do you have anything?
Don't.
Anybody else? Okay, staff, John.
Yes. The polar plunge is not this Saturday, but the following Saturday. I know in years past, several council members have, if we raised a certain donation, then you volunteered to jump in the pool. Just throwing that out there as an option. I think, are you participating?
I'm on a team. Yeah.
He's on a team.
But I'll go in a second time if, they raise, say, $250.
Okay, $250 for a second dip. Do I hear 300, Councilman Barker?
I've got a lot of metal inside me that doesn't like cold water.
They also have a 2 chicken zone or something like that, but
I'll do that.
At the very least, council.
It's a bullfrog spa that they set up for today.
So, council, come and participate. It's a great activity for the Special Olympics. We get the word out, they get the word out. They are trying to make it bigger and better every year. We're trying to work on the details of the spa or something to make it work, but the Parks and Rec team is doing a great job there. Citizens Academy, I sent an email out to you. If you haven't participated in the Law Enforcement Citizens Academy, it's a great experience, I hear. I haven't done it because I'm always in meetings. I know Councilman Swanson has. But it's Wednesday night for 7 weeks, plus a Saturday. But they show you tactics, they teach you what officers learn. It's a great experience, but I sent that out in an email. And then just as a reminder, lots of staff will reach out to you via email. So, respond when you can, help out where you can. And I think that's everything I've got, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Susan, do you have anything?
I do. So on the 25th, we have scheduled, his name is Kirby's a parliamentarian, and he was going to come to do kind of a training for the first 45 minutes, just to kind of give you some training on kind of rules and procedures and kind of help some of our newer people and just kind of reemphasize things. I need to double check with them with us moving online, how that could kind of work and make sure, but that was planned to be from 6 to 6:45. And so I was gonna make the agenda to say that's our training, and then we would start after kind of that point.
As long as we inform the public of when it would be good for them to join, that'd be good.
Yeah, that's kind of what John and I had spoken about. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. I have nothing. So we're missing Councilmember Stoker. So who's taking over the adjournment motion? Somebody has to, else we'll be here all night.
I'll take up the name. So motion to adjourn.
Okay, second, thank you.